Chapter 146. As soon as this matter was brought up, Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly forgot to question him about the matter of him fainting. She pursed her lips and said, "You bad guy, you cheated me of my meteorite. Of course, you have to compensate me with a good knife." She paused and then fiercely said, "If this knife isn't good enough, and I'm not satisfied with it, then it doesn't count." Her words were said fiercely, but the little girl's face was flushed. After all, as a girl, this was the first time that she had accepted a gift from a boy. Moreover, she was afraid that he wouldn't give it to her. Monsieur's products are all exquisite. "I guarantee that you'll be satisfied." June Moxie smiled and stood up. He walked into the room and turned around. He held a sheath knife in his hand and walked out. This knife had an elegant arc and was as thin as a cicada's wing. It looked as light as a feather in June Moxie's hand. But, it gave people a completely different feeling. There was a kind of dignified and thick feeling. This formed an extreme contrast with its light and elegant appearance. It gave people a very contradictory feeling even though it was still in the sheath. Dugu Xiaoyi liked it as soon as she saw it. Her big eyes blinked as she waited for June Moxie to introduce it to her. June Moxie looked at Dugu Xiaoyi. He held the knife hilt and slowly pulled it out. The knife didn't make any sound when it was unsheathed. There was only a flash of light. June Moxie's hand seemed to have a shiny water belt. The knife's body seemed to be moving like the Milky Way. It was sparkling and moving. The knife's body was flat, but the light on it seemed to have its own consciousness. It was floating back and forth. Hidden knife in red sleeve. June Moxie gently stroked the back of the knife with his fingers and said, "Therefore, this knife is called red sleeve. My body is in Tianxiang, so it is called red sleeve Tianxiang. This knife is the first famous knife that I have made in my life. Therefore, it is named Red Sleeve Tianxiang's first knife. Red Sleeve Tianxiang's first knife. What a nice name." Dugu Xiaoyi's eyes lit up. She stared at the knife in June Moxie's hand eagerly, wishing she could snatch it. Humph, how could that ugly big rock compare to this cute knife? It seemed like it was the right decision for the extraterrestrial meteoric iron to fall into June Moxie's hands. The curvature, length, and weight of this dagger are all made according to the requirements of the hidden blade hidden in one's sleeve. Take a look and see if it fits. June Moxie handed over the knife. "So beautiful. Is it really for me?" Dugu Xiaoyi held the saber in front of her eyes, fiddling with it over and over again, unable to put it down. After a while, he held the saber in his arms and tilted his head slightly, looking at June Moxie with an expectant expression. "Of course. Does Miss Dugu not like it?" June Moxie looked at her with a faint smile. "Of course I like it." Dugu Xiaoyi lowered her head shyly, "But you're giving me such a good knife, and I don't have anything to give you. This is what I owe you. You don't have to return the favor." June Moxie almost laughed. This little girl is really naive and cute. "Let's do it this way." Dugu Xiaoyi bit her lips. It seemed as if she had made up her mind about something. She slowly pulled a thin thread from her neck, and a small sparkling and translucent jade pendant fell into her hand. I'll give you this." Dugu Xiaoyi lowered her head. Her toes unconsciously tapped on the ground, and her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. "Good." June Moxie accepted it with a clear conscience. This killer with an incomparably low EQ didn't think about the special meaning of this gift. He just felt that with his own skills, creating a knife that could be called the best in this world was not something that a small jade pendant could exchange for. With his own creation, this knife did not have to worry about the resistance of the wind when used. Moreover, because of the curve of the blade, it would not produce any wind when used, making it extremely hidden. It was really the best choice for a woman to use a knife. Moreover, it was extremely sharp and tough. With such a knife, even if he received this jade pendant, it would be a matter of course. In fact, this gift in return was much lighter. This jade pendant, you. Dugu Xiaoyi saw June Moxie take it and casually put it in his arms. Her heart became even more bashful, and she stammered, not knowing what to say. It's okay, it's also Miss Dugu's kind intentions. But since Miss Dugu specifically wanted this knife, I'm sure you're very proficient in knife skills? June Moxie smiled. He had only used 1/20th of a piece of meteoric iron to create this knife, and the rest had been turned into small flying knives. In this regard, June Moxie naturally did not have any reluctance. Knife skills? Of course. When Dugu Xiaoyi heard June Moxie say, it's also a kind intention, she could not help but blush, as if her face was glowing, and she was incomparably happy. Hearing June Moxie's question, she could not help but be excited, and said, I'll show you. After saying that, she did not dare to look at June Moxie again. After exchanging that token, if she stood here again, she would really die of embarrassment. She jumped out, waved the knife, and then stepped to the left, the knife moving with her, silver light surrounding her body. Although this knife was also made using ordinary methods, but under the operation of June Moxie's art of unlocking heaven's fortune, Dugu Xiaoyi only felt that the knife was incomparably compatible with her small hand, as if her arm had inexplicably grown a section. She could control it with ease, and it was a very ordinary knife skill, impenetrable by wind and rain, extremely wonderful. June Moxie only watched a few moves, and sighed. Ever since he saw June Wui and June Zhantian practice, he knew that this world paid far more attention to Xian Qi than to the ingenious changes in moves. Naturally, as long as there was enough Xian Qi, it was very possible to break 10 moves with one move. In the face of absolute power, any ingenious move would be vulnerable. Think about it, would a Supreme Shen Xian need to use any special moves to attack a silver-leveled Xian Qi practitioner? And this habit also created the iron rule, those below the 9th-leveled Xian Qi are all ants. However, no matter which world, if two people with similar Xian Qi were to fight, the rules of moves would definitely be a very important method, and could easily determine life and death. Especially for a girl like Dugu Xiaoyi, if she were to compete with others in strength, it was simply courting death. Women's strength was naturally weaker than men, but this was something that could not be helped. Like a cow chewing on a peony. June Moxie sighed, letting Dugu Xiaoyi hear it clearly, such a good knife, but you use this kind of knife skill, it's simply a waste of heaven's gift. You said that my knife skill is not good? Dugu Xiaoyi put away her knife, and stood upright, looking at June Moxie with her big bright eyes. How should I put it, it's not your own problem, but the way you use the knife is too rigid. June Moxie unceremoniously took the knife from Dugu Xiaoyi's hand, took a step forward, and swung the knife diagonally. With a tremble, 3 to 4 knife flowers appeared, and while protecting himself, it also covered the area 5 feet in front of him. If there was an enemy in front of him, just this move alone was enough to make them retreat. June Moxie wielded the knife very slowly, because he could not infuse Xian Qi into the knife, and could not use the mysterious power of the art of unlocking heaven's fortune. But when June Moxie used it like this, his posture became more and more elegant, like the floating clouds and flowing water, continuous and continuous. What a beautiful knife skill! Dugu Xiaoyi applauded, and her eyes could not help but show a trace of desire. This is the red sleeve knife skill, the first move, red sleeve light wave. June Moxie stopped, smiled, and said, the red sleeve knife has a total of 9 moves, the red sleeve knife dance soul vanishes. It can be said to be a first-class knife skill, do you want to learn it? Of course I want to. Dugu Xiaoyi happily jumped in front of June Moxie, quickly teach me. As she spoke, because the two were too close, the hot breath from her mouth blew on June Moxie's face, with an inexplicable fragrance. Coupled with the virgin fragrance of Dugu Xiaoyi, June Moxie suddenly inhaled it, and could not help but feel his heart skip a beat. He could not help but fall back, and then immediately thought, teach me then, what am I afraid of? Then he turned back. Dugu Xiaoyi saw his face blushing, and was very amused. She did not expect that this famous playboy in Tianxiang would actually blush because of a woman. Thinking of this, her heart was even more tempted to tease him, and she aggressively moved forward, and was about to open her mouth to speak. At this moment, June Moxie's body suddenly turned back, and in a split second, both of them were stunned. 4 pairs of lips were tightly pressed together, and 4 eyes were staring at each other in astonishment. Dang! The knife in Dugu Xiaoyi's hand fell to the ground, and her whole body seemed to be in a fog. Even her thoughts seemed to have stopped at this moment, and her body stiffened. Unexpectedly, she did not know how to dodge. As soon as Jun Moxie turned back, he suddenly felt a sweet and fragrant softness on his lips. He did not have time to think, and his tongue subconsciously licked it. It was quite tasty, and he could not help but lick it again. Dugu Xiaoyi screamed, and her beautiful face instantly turned red, and then became fiery red. In a split second, her entire body became hot, and even her jade-like neck became bright red. Covering her face with both hands, she squatted down on the ground, and breathed heavily, but did not make a sound. He kissed me. Dugu Xiaoyi's mind was a mess. He gave me a knife, took my jade pendant, and then, kissed me. This was an accident, really just an accident. Jun Moxie awkwardly spread out his hands, and subconsciously stuck out his tongue to lick his upper lip, and then his lower lip, a little embarrassed. He was teaching his female disciple with the appearance of a highly respected master, but who knew that in the blink of an eye, he would turn into a rogue, even though it was unintentional. Little White saw Jun Moxie sticking out his tongue, and could not help but feel excited. With a swoosh, it jumped onto Jun Moxie's body, and with a smack, it kissed him on his upper lip, followed by another smack, and did the same to his lower lip. Damn! I was actually molested by a mystical beast, this little thing. Jun Moxie hurriedly grabbed it and threw it away. With such a scene, the trace of charm and gentleness in his heart suddenly disappeared. Miss Dugu, you quickly get up. Squatting down and covering your eyes, how are you going to learn the knife skill? Jun Moxie kindly said. Chapter 147. Damn, what did I do to you? Jun Moxie scratched his head. Then how should I address you? Humph. You know it in your heart. Dugu Xiaoyi wanted to stamp her feet. I've never seen such a blockhead. I know. Jun Moxie frowned and thought hard. Suddenly, he clapped his hands together. Dugu Xiaoyi's body trembled and she couldn't help but move her fingers away from her eyes. She looked at him with a shy, happy, and expectant expression. Jun Mo Xia understood. That's right, our relationship is different now. I'm teaching her, this is a master-disciple relationship. He couldn't help but put on a stern face and put on the posture of a teacher. Little girl, my disciple, get up quickly. Master will teach you the exquisite knife skills. Teach your head. Dugu Xiaoyi jumped up angrily and stepped on his foot. She couldn't help but step on his foot a few more times and said hatefully, whose master are you? Who is your disciple? Humph. Jun Moxie was caught off guard. He didn't expect this disciple to be so rebellious. He gritted his teeth and said, you must respect your master. Respect your head. Respect your head. You think you're not a debauchee just because you know a few knife skills? Let me tell you, don't think that you're not a debauchee just because you know how to play with knives, and you're not a prodigal just because you pretend. You big bad guy. Dugu Xiaoyi flew into a rage out of humiliation. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws, ready to pounce on him. Too infuriating. Too infuriating. This big bad guy. This pig head. This unromantic pig head. You're really unreasonable. How am I a debauchee? How am I a big bad guy? Jun Moxie was flabbergasted. He said resentfully. This is a huge injustice. Those debauches were obviously done by the previous Mo Xia. I was the hero who saved the Jun family from the brink of collapse. I didn't do anything bad. I really don't know what this girl is thinking. I just helped you level up your whitey, gave you a good saber, and even taught you a high-tier saber technique, but you're still so cruel to me. Didn't I just accidentally kiss you? Besides, I didn't do it on purpose. I don't know if it was your first kiss, but it was my standard first kiss. It was my first kiss in both of my lives. If we really have to talk about who's at a disadvantage, it's me who's at a disadvantage. Wait, suffer a loss. Could it be that just a kiss just now made her feel like she had suffered a loss and wanted to repay him with her body? June Moxie shuddered. That won't do. Most girls develop early. This brother's body is only 16 years old. I'm still a minor. You can't destroy the flowers of the motherland. Besides, I haven't had enough of the carefree days of being single. Hurry up and teach me that saber technique. Weren't you bragging about your saber technique just now? Dugu Xiaoyi stomped her feet angrily and bit her lips. She wanted to fling her sleeves and leave, but she really couldn't bear to do so. It wasn't easy to get a chance to see him. Moreover, it was accompanied by 7 brothers. When will we meet again? But this blockhead. Thinking of this, Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly wanted to cry. This bastard, he kissed me. Even my parents haven't kissed me before. Oh, this is a big loss. He's the world's #1 debauchee. He must have kissed many girls. It's definitely not the first time. Dugu Xiaoyi was actually thinking about these things. A girl's feelings were indeed not something that ordinary people could understand. I'll teach you just because you want me to. Do you think I owe you anything? June Moxie rolled his eyes. His words made Dugu Xiaoyi almost die of anger. She stared at him. Suddenly, her eyes turned red. Tears started to fall from her eyes as she whimpered. You bully me. Her heart was filled with endless grievance. This bastard kissed me, accepted my jade pendant, and then he's actually yelling at me. I'm about to leave, and he's still yelling at me. Doesn't he know that a girl needs to be coaxed? Sigh. June Mo Xia sighed and felt powerless. Heavens! Why is this chick so hard to please? It seemed that the hitman June had lived 2 lives. His experience was very, very extensive. However, he was completely clueless when it came to coaxing a girl. Little White stood in the middle of the two at a loss. He looked from one to the other. It seemed that these two were in conflict. But who should I help? The little guy couldn't make up his mind. Boo-hoo. I'm going to look for the 3rd uncle. I'm going to look for Grandpa June. I'm going to tell them that you bullied me. Boo. I hate you. I hate you. Dugu Xiaoyi covered her face and started to walk away. June Moxie hastily pulled her back. Aunt, what do you want? I was wrong, okay. This was the first time in his 2 lives that the hitman June had admitted his mistake. Let go. Men and women shouldn't touch each other. Why are you pulling me like this? Dugu Xiaoyi puffed her cheeks as she tilted her head. June Mo Xia was somewhat speechless. Last time, it was just a rumor, and your 7 brothers immediately came knocking on my door. If you go out crying this time, maybe your grandfather will personally send an army to come knocking on my door. God, why is my life so bitter? Aunt, I'll teach you. June Moxie begged for mercy. How could he not bow his head when he was under the eaves? Humph. Dugu Xiaoyi snorted, you're sensible. Suddenly, she realized that June Mo Xia's big hand was still grabbing her arm. She couldn't help but blush, and her whole body started to itch. She didn't know whether it was uncomfortable or comfortable. She couldn't help but whisper, you let go of me. Her voice was unexpectedly soft and bashful. June Moxie let go of her hand and couldn't help but grab his hair. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with this girl today. In just a few short breaths, her mood had changed back and forth 5 or 6 times. What happened to her valiant attitude? Was she in disguise? June Moxie was a newbie in the field of love. He couldn't understand why the little girl's mood changed so much. So fast. No wonder people often say that women are the most difficult animals to understand in the world. This is not a lie. Ahem, watch carefully. The red sleeve knife technique has 9 moves. June Mo Xia lifted the red sleeve dagger and held it close to his elbow. The first move, red sleeve light wave. Jun Mo Xia wanted to quickly finish teaching the red sleeve dagger and send this little witch away as soon as possible. Anyway, it wasn't a profound martial art, it was just a set of dagger techniques. But leaving this lass here was simply too torturous. The second move, red sleeve fragrance. The third move, red sleeve like a dream. Red sleeve clouds, red sleeve dancing wind, red sleeve falling thunder, red sleeve lightning, red sleeve dreams, red sleeve heaven and earth. Dugu Xiaoyi's talent in martial arts was very good, and she was also very intelligent. So, it only took her an hour to memorize the entire set of saber techniques. Jun Mo Xia continued to give her pointers and correct her posture. He thought that she would be able to master it in a short while, but unexpectedly, the more Dugu Xiaoyi practiced, the more confused she became. She had already learned most of it, and was even able to use it properly. But, in the end, she was completely out of tune. Even a very simple posture was wrong. Jun Mo Xia had to step forward and correct her. Naturally, some physical contact was unavoidable. Jun Mo Xia's physical strength was quite good. But, he was still drenched in sweat after being tormented by this little girl. On the other hand, Dugu Xiaoyi was in high spirits. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes were moving, and she was panting tenderly. If one were to look at Jun Mo Xie's appearance, it would seem like he was a laborer who was powerlessly working, and would die from exhaustion. But if one were to look at Dugu Xiaoyi's appearance, it would seem like a pair of children flirting with each other. It would seem like a beautiful scene. However, Jun Mo Xie's emotional quotient was extremely close to zero. So, he simply didn't think about it. Instead, he kept complaining in his heart, "I'm too stupid. More stupid than a pig. How long do I have to teach her?" Suddenly, a deafening roar of cannons was heard outside. Then, there was the sound of officials moving out to clear a path. The orderly footsteps of a large group of people could be heard. What happened? Both of them were startled at the same time. They stopped involuntarily. Jun Moxie wiped the sweat from his face and let out a sigh of relief. He felt strange in his heart. "I almost couldn't hold on, so how is this girl able to hold on? Could it be that this little girl is also hiding her strength? It doesn't look like it." He did not know that the intelligent Dugu Xiaoyi had already memorized the entire set of bladesmanship the second time. She had deliberately made mistakes. Dugu Xiaoyi did not feel tired during the whole process. Instead, her heart was filled with the shyness and happiness of flirting with her sweetheart. She had already evolved the process of teaching the bladesmanship into a happy experience. Since it was a happy experience, how could it be tiring? It seems that a different state of mind really does affect one's stamina. The imperial teacher of Yutang, Fei Mengchen, has come to visit Tianxiang today. A large group of people has already arrived outside Tianxiang city. Jun Wui was sitting in a wheelchair. He was pushed out by Dugu Ying. Yutang's #1 general, Zhao Jianhun, has also come. His Majesty has already sent the crown prince to welcome him into the city. When he said the 3 words, Zhao Jianhun, Jun Wui's eyes flashed, and his tone was quite strange. In addition, the Shenxi Empire's #1 Xian Qi Grandmaster, Shi Changshao, has also arrived today. His Majesty has also sent the 2nd prince to welcome him. As for the 3rd prince, he is in the city preparing for the arrival of the emissaries. Jun Wui said lightly. His Majesty's arrangements can be said to be quite outstanding. Jun Moxie praised. The Emperor clearly knows that these 2 emissaries have ulterior motives, but he has sent the 3 princes to receive them separately. This shows that the Emperor's intentions are very deep. His Majesty is testing his blade again. Jun Wui smiled faintly. If nothing unexpected happens, the successor to the throne should be chosen after the incident in the capital city. Jun Moxie was somewhat puzzled and asked, "Why is that?" Chapter 148. Jun Wui's eyelids drooped as he spoke in an indifferent tone. Deep down, he was reveling in the process of dispelling his nephew's doubts. After all, Jun Dashao had been too domineering during this period of time. As his uncle, he had always acted according to his wishes, and it was rare for him to dispel his doubts. Let's go and join in the fun. June Moxie rolled his eyes as he thought, the three princes aren't good people. No matter which one of them becomes the emperor, it won't be a good thing. At least, it won't be a good thing for the June family. Damn it! I might as well kill them all. The 7 brothers of the Dugu family were eager to see the world in chaos. So, they cheered in unison. Dugu Xiaoyi smiled sweetly and nodded. She held Xiao Bai in her arms and suddenly moved closer to June Moxie's ear. She whispered, "Is it your secret that we fainted? I won't tell anyone, and I won't ask you about it. I understand." Then, she paused for a moment and continued, "But, when you feel that you can tell me, will you tell me?" June Moxie turned his head in surprise and looked at Dugu Xiaoyi. The little girl's eyes were full of shyness and affection. But the expression in her eyes was firm, "I won't harm you, and I won't make things difficult for you." These words could be clearly read from her eyes. In that instant, June Moxie felt his heart soften. His eyes warmed up and he gently patted Dugu Xiaoyi's hair. But, he didn't say anything. There was no need to say anything. Slap! June Moxie's hand was slapped to the side. Dugu Chung glared at him and shouted, "Boy, don't try to take advantage of my little sister. Do you think it's so easy to take advantage of my little sister? If you do this again, I won't say anything else. I'll chop off your hand." June Mo Xia had managed to raise a trace of warmth with great difficulty. But this slap had completely dissipated June Mo Xia. Dugu Xiaoyi looked at his strange expression and couldn't help but chuckle. She looked at him apologetically. The group followed the crowd and came to the main street. Dugu Ying and his brothers deliberately prevented June Moxie from coming into contact with their sister. They weaved left and right, walking very fast. However, June Moxie fell right into his trap. After putting some distance between them, he turned around and disappeared without a trace. The little lass looked around for June Moxie, but she couldn't find him. She turned around and threw a tantrum at her 7 brothers. Little White had already snuggled into her arms and was fast asleep. The previous advancement seemed simple, but the process was actually quite difficult. It really made this little thing quite tired. At this moment the excitement was gone, and it naturally fell into a deep sleep. June Moxie successfully blended into the crowd and couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He walked forward aimlessly. Although he was walking aimlessly, he was happier than before because he no longer had the little girl to hold him back. June Mo Xia didn't realize that the little girl Dugu had already implanted her image into the hitman's heart. Although his impression of her wasn't necessarily good, but it had left a deep imprint on him. "So it's really you, boy. Haha, last time you scolded me and ran away. Fate has brought us together, but today you won't be able to run away." A familiar voice sounded from the left side of June Dashao. June Moxie turned his head and saw a middle-aged man walking towards him with a smile on his face. He was followed by 2 bodyguards. The middle-aged man stretched out his hand to pat June Moxie's thin and weak shoulders. The former June Mo Xia could be said to have indulged in the 5 poisons of eating, drinking, whoring, and perverting the 5 poisons. He had turned his originally weak and frail body into an abnormal trash. It would be an exaggeration to say that he was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Hitman June had used the Hong June Pagoda and the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune to repair and temper his body. Although the essence of his body had become very different, but the external appearance didn't seem to have changed much. In fact, there wasn't much difference between his body and that of a debauchee of the past. June Mo Xia dodged backwards and dodged the man's hand. The hitman wasn't used to strangers touching his body, so he didn't immediately retaliate. So, he raised his eyebrows and said, "So it's you." Although it was only a glimpse, June Dashao was an ultimate assassin. He quickly recalled that this man was the one he had met in the store that day when it was raining on the Mid-Autumn Festival. It was also on that day that June Moxie had coincidentally obtained the level 9 Xian Dan. And now, The level 9 Xian core had attracted the attention of many powerhouses from all over the world, and they had arrived in Tianxiang one after another. And now, they had coincidentally met him again. Jun Dashao couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't just the Earth that was round. Every planet was round, that's me. The middle-aged man didn't seem offended by Jun Imosie's resistance. He smiled and said, "A wanderer who has fallen to the ends of the earth. Little brother, we meet again. It can be said that we are brought together by fate." Jun Moxie didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The word "brought together by fate" had been used exclusively to tease Dugu Xiaoyi. However, he hadn't expected that it would be used on him. This made Jun Moxie feel as if he was being teased. It would have been better if that person had been a woman. But it was a middle-aged uncle. No, a young man wasn't good either. It's fate that we met. But, when did I curse you? Jun Moxie was somewhat puzzled. He had never inadvertently forgotten the things that he had experienced. Although he wasn't in a good mood that day, but he definitely hadn't cursed anyone. Humph. You little brat, you still want to act shamelessly? You cursed this old man in a roundabout way before you left. Do you really think that this old man didn't hear it? The middle-aged man laughed. 1,000 cups is too little when drinking with a bosom friend. Aren't these words cursing me? Moreover, no one in this world is worthy to drink with you at the same table. These words are clearly saying that I'm not qualified enough. Isn't this cursing? Humph. Jun Moxie hiccuped twice and stared at this old man in front of him. No matter how he looked at it, he didn't look more than 40 years old. How dare he call himself an old man? Wasn't the old man of this world too worthless? In his 30s, or at most 40, he called himself an old man. Isn't this a little too strange? Are you finally willing to admit it? The middle-aged man smiled slyly. If you really feel apologetic, then take out the heavenly wine that you mentioned the other day as an apology. How about that? Jun Moxie was dumbfounded. There was actually such a person. Even a lion wouldn't be so ruthless, right? He couldn't help but roll his eyes and said, "Why do I have to apologize? But your shameless appearance is quite similar to my style in the past." Ahem. The middle-aged man choked on his words. After thinking for a long time, he laughed, as expected of a scholar. You really don't use any vulgar words when you curse. But, little brat, how old are you? How dare you call yourself in the past, in front of this old man? 10 years can be compared to the past, and 1 year can also be compared to the past. The next time I see a 7 or 8-year-old child, I will also call myself an old man. Think about what happened in the past. Who can't say it? Jun Moxie snorted and said. Ha ha ha, forget it, I won't tease you anymore. Come, accompany me for a drink. The middle-aged man laughed heartily and was about to hold Jun Dashao's hand. You know who I am. Why did you casually drag me to drink with you? Jun Moxie frowned. We just met by chance. After a drink, we go our separate ways. Why do I need to know who you are? The middle-aged man smiled strangely. You said that. But I said that it was fate that we met. Since it is fate, why can't we drink a few cups together? You're awesome. Jun Moxie gave him a thumbs up. You actually remember it so clearly. I find that I really can't talk nonsense in front of you. Jun Moxie suddenly felt that this guy's way of talking was actually quite to his liking. It seemed that this was the first time that he had met a bosom friend since his reincarnation. Jun Moxie couldn't help but feel quite interested. In fact, the hitman Jun didn't have many friends in his previous life. An assassin is always lonely. Are you waiting to see the country's master Fei Mengchen enter the city? The middle-aged man smiled reservedly. Yes and no. I just thought that it would be very lively in a while. So, I came to see if it's the country's master from another country. It's just for the fun of it. Jun Moxie smiled. Watch the fun. Well said. In the end, it's just an old bastard from an enemy country and a bunch of little bastards with ulterior motives. Let's just watch a monkey show. The middle-aged man chuckled. No matter how welcoming he is now, no matter how enthusiastic he is, when the time comes for the two armies to face each other, he definitely won't show any mercy. Welcome my ass. He doesn't come when he wants to, he doesn't leave when it's time to leave, and now he's holding such a grand welcoming ceremony. Whether the country's master will come or not is none of our business. The middle-aged man snorted as if he was extremely dissatisfied with this matter. Well said. June Moxie applauded. This speech alone is enough for me to drink 2 cups of wine. Is it the wine that you said is 100 times stronger than Old Song's wine? The rare and exceptional wine in this world? The middle-aged man's words were full of ridicule. It was clear that in his mind, this wine was not only rare but absolutely non-existent. June Moxie tilted his head, snorted, and said, I don't want to argue with an ignorant person like you. Facts always speak louder than words, and justice is in the hearts of the people. The middle-aged man laughed heartily, and didn't argue any further. Instead, he pulled June Moxie away. On the other side of the city gate, the crown prince had already received the Yutang Empire's master. Dozens of horses were lined up side by side, and the imperial guards were lined up on both sides. In the middle of the group was the high-spirited crown prince, who was riding a horse beside him. From time to time, he would smile and talk with the imperial tutor Fei Mengchen, who was riding a horse beside him. The imperial tutor seemed to be talking with a smile on his face, as if he was introducing the scenery of Tianxiang City to the imperial tutor. The middle-aged man turned around and saw the crown prince's expression and actions. He sighed, shook his head, and turned away. June Moxie was led by the middle-aged man into a small alley. He turned left and right, and found that the terrain was very familiar. It seemed that he had arrived at Old Song's tavern. June Moxie looked at the middle-aged man's attire, and thought that he should be someone with some status, right? How could he be so familiar with these small alleys? Old Song, I've caught that brat from last time for you. Haha, hurry up and get me the good wine you promised me. June Moxie heard these words and the tone of these words, and suddenly felt as if he had been sold. This posture was similar to that of an assassin holding the head of his employer's enemy to offer a reward. Chapter 149. It's like this, Old Song loves wine as much as his life. Apart from drinking, his only hobby is making wine. Unfortunately, his wine is the best in the entire Tianxiang. That day, after listening to your fallacious argument, he actually appreciated it and became a close friend of the wine nation. Every day, he would say that he wanted to see you again, so this old man decided to fulfill his wish. Ha ha ha, while at the same time, he gambled 3 jars of good wine. The middle-aged man rubbed his hands, and didn't look embarrassed. Instead, he looked as if his conspiracy had succeeded. June Moxie was speechless. Ever since he came to this world, he had always been the one taking advantage of others and using them. But today, he was actually used by someone, and he didn't even see the slightest trace of it. What kind of story was this? Don't mock me, what a great shame. June Sunchao's hair stood up in anger. This enmity must be avenged. You old man, wait for this young master to properly treat you, and let you know why the flowers are so red. How am I supposed to avenge him? A thin and small old man with a stooped body came out in 3 steps. He laughed loudly and said, Honored guests, honored guests. I was wondering why I heard magpies chirping. Turns out there are 2 honored guests at the same time. Young master, it was a pity that we didn't get the chance to meet last time, but today, we finally have the opportunity to meet again. Please, quickly come in. Although he said that they were 2 honored guests, his words had already filtered out the middle-aged man, and he didn't even have the intention to let him pass. The middle-aged man didn't know whether it was because he was thick-skinned, or because he didn't feel offended. As for his 2 bodyguards, they disappeared as soon as they entered the store, presumably hiding in the dark. June Moxie was startled. The moment this old man came out, he gave him a very familiar feeling. Looking at his figure and face, June Moxie couldn't help but feel strange. He entered the store with a smile, but his heart was secretly paying attention. That day, I heard young master's wise words. You said, when you drink wine, you drink your mood and mood. It doesn't mean that you pour the wine into your stomach. Even if you drink wine, it can only be said to be a waste of food. These words have resonated deeply with me. Old Song poured tea for the guests and chattered on. This old man has been brewing wine for dozens of years. In the art of brewing wine, I often boast that no one in the world can surpass me. But half of my life, I have been a fly and a dog, and now I am being trampled upon by the common people. Now that I think about it, it's really lamentable. That's right, it really is a waste of food. Even today, I still say the same thing. June Moxie snorted. He looked at the middle-aged man who did not treat him as an outsider and took out the wine jars himself. But in young master's opinion, how can it not be considered as a waste of food? Old Song's old eyes lit up as he asked with a humble expression. What is wine? June Moxie asked. Why do people love wine in the first place? Why do they like wine? What is wine? Song Laosan asked himself. He was a bit confused. He claimed to be a winemaker for his entire life, but what exactly is wine? That one question had actually stumped him. To say that wine is just a drink. It would be too unfair to wine. But what is it other than that? Wine is the mood. June Moxie emphasized, therefore, drinking wine is actually drinking the mood. When one is in a good mood and is doing things smoothly, drinking wine to celebrate is called celebration wine. When one is depressed, drinking wine to drown one's worries is called sorrow wine. When a good friend comes to visit, it is called bosom friend wine. When a good friend sees him off, it is called sad farewell wine. When soldiers fight on the battlefield, it is called strong blood wine. When killing the enemy, it is called killing wine. The taste of the wine is secondary. The mood before drinking is the true taste of the wine. June Moxie poured a cup and drank it in one gulp. With a lonely expression, he said, when one is alone in a foreign land, wandering and uncertain, drinking wine at this time is called homesickness wine. When one is alone in a foreign land, drinking wine to drown one's worries is more worrying. Good poem, good poem. Brilliant theory, brilliant theory. Young master is truly a genius. The middle-aged man and Old Song were already fascinated by Chu Yang's words. After a while, Old Song came to his senses and praised Chu Yang again and again. Brilliant theory? What is brilliant theory? June Moxie sneered. There are 3 classes of people in wine. What I have said is true drinking. It is all about following one's heart. With the help of wine, one can taste the different flavors of life. This is the upper class of people in wine. When the upper class drinks, 10,000 people can taste 10,001 different flavors. This is because of the different states of mind. There is no wealth or poverty in wine. There is no distinction between beggars and high officials. If one knows how to drink and drink with one's heart, then one is a wine expert. If one cannot drink according to one's heart, and even before drinking, one must test one's knowledge of wine appreciation and tasting, and finally taste the wine, then this is simply a game for scholars. Compared to the true way of wine, it is simply putting the cart before the horse. It is the biggest joke in the world. Therefore, drinking for the sake of tasting and appraising wine, and even using wine to compete with one's own knowledge, is of a lower class. But drinking in this way, although it is not the same as drinking wine, it has an additional sense of elegance. Although it cannot be considered as a disgrace to wine, one can only reluctantly be considered a wine expert. But with the word hypocrite in it, so one cannot be considered a true wine gentleman. June Moxie said. The middle-aged man and Old Song's eyes flashed with a strange light. They wanted to open their mouths to say something, but they restrained themselves and patiently listened to what June Dashao had to say. However, the 2 of them were secretly laughing in their hearts. This young man's words, the words true and hypocrite, were very obvious. It was as if he was saying that those sour scholars were all hypocrites. Anyone would be able to discern the hidden meaning in his words. Jun Imo Xie squinted his eyes. His attitude was wild as he continued, apart from the above two, the next level is more conventional. Whether it be in the brothel, drinking and socializing in the pub, or chatting with friends in a luxurious mansion, or competing over wine tables in the political arena, all of them are scheming and plotting against each other. So, they are the lowest level of people in the world of wine. As for those who use wine to harm others, those who harbor evil intentions, they are a waste of wine, and are not worthy of being discussed by me. The middle-aged man and old Song listened to Jun Imo Xie's brilliant words, and nodded slightly. Then, they became silent, and felt a faint sense of pride in their hearts. I've been a wine enthusiast for decades. So, I should be considered a true wine gentleman, right? Who would have thought that Jun Dashao would say something even more shocking? He pointed at the two of them and lightly shook them. Based on the two of you, perhaps you can barely be considered a lower class. Nonsense. The two of them were finally enraged and shouted at the same time. You should know that these two people are confident that they are the experts of the wine nation. Your theory may be reasonable, but with our decades of experience in the way of wine, how could you use the word barely to be evaluated as a second-grade wine? This is too much of a bully. Seeing that the two of them were enraged, Jun Dashao didn't seem to care and continued, don't be unconvinced when I say that you can barely be considered a lower class. You have been immersed in the Tao of wine for decades, and this experience cannot be denied. But to taste wine, to appraise wine, to enjoy wine, and to drink wine for the sake of it, there is another condition. That is, you must have qualified wine. Not only have you not tasted such wine, you have not even seen it before. Just this knowledge alone is enough to make you inferior. Jun Moxie stretched out his little finger and gently shook it. However, I can't blame you for this. I believe that no one else in this world has this kind of wine besides me. Old Song, your wine can be said to be the best in the entire Tianxiang Empire. But when compared to the wines I know, the wines I have spoken about, and the wines I have tasted, the difference is like the difference between the heavens and the earth. It is impossible to compare them in the same breath. These words were somewhat sophistry, but he had already begun to promote his wine. Young master, when it comes to wine, it is true that you speak of gold and spit out jade, which has opened my eyes. However, when it comes to wine-making, I, Old Song, have traveled all over the world. I can say this bluntly, if my wine can't be tasted, then I'm afraid that there is no wine in the world that can enter your eyes. Old Song wasn't happy that Jun Imo Xie had said that he wasn't qualified, and now that he had heard the last few words, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He wasn't convinced. This old man has been immersed in the art of wine for a lifetime, and I dare say that I have tasted all the best wines in the world. But looking at the best wines in the world, I don't think any of them can be compared to this old man's secret wine. But this little devil dares to say that your wine is like the difference between the heavens and the earth? How could Old Song not be angry? But this wasn't an exaggeration, and it was up to Jun Dashao to refute. The world was vast, and it wasn't necessarily that there wasn't a better wine in the world, or that he didn't know about it. Compared to Jun Dashao's words, the whereabouts of the wine was naturally more important. Jun Imo Xie smiled in a noncommittal manner. He didn't refute the sharp words he had spoken earlier. The middle-aged man's ears pricked up as he looked from one to the other. Suddenly, he rolled his eyes and said, Old Song, there's always someone better out there, and there's always someone better behind the wine. If this little brother can really come up with a wine that's 100 times better than yours, then what would you do? Then I'd be willing to take him as my master. Old Song's eyebrows twitched, and his eyes flashed as he blurted out. At this moment, his stooped body suddenly straightened up, and a strong sense of self-confidence and pride burst out of him. In addition to self-confidence and pride, there was also a trace of heartfelt expectation in his eyes. If he could really produce such a good wine, then why not take him as his master? Jun Moxie's heart suddenly stirred, and he was able to confirm Old Song's identity. So it's him. No wonder I felt a sense of déjà vu. The last time he and his third uncle Jun Wui settled the matter of the Huanghua Hall, the uncle and nephew were chased by a mysterious Tian Xian level expert. Although Jun Moxie was able to scare him off with a clever trick, but that person's tyrannical strength was even higher than Jun Wui's, and it was still fresh in Jun Moxie's memory. According to Jun Moxie's judgment, this person's strength was extremely high, and he was even stronger than the Silver Blizzard cities Mu Shuetong and Xiao Han, and was only slightly weaker than his grandfather Jun Zhan Tian. Who would have thought that the mysterious Tian Xian expert in front of him and the owner of the tavern, Old Song, would have a connection? But just as Old Song unintentionally said those words in a fit of pique, a trace of his aura leaked out due to the fluctuations in his mood. Although this trace of aura was fleeting, but it was enough for Jun Moxie to recognize him, and in an instant, the two figures overlapped in his mind. Just like in a slow-motion movie, the two figures constantly split up, and then recombined. Every movement and every kind of aura was repeated several times in Jun Moxie's mind, and finally, the two figures merged into one. It's him. Chapter 150. This interesting discovery made the corners of Jun Moxie's mouth curl up. He didn't want to have a drinking contest with Old Song because there was no need to. With his status, it would be worthwhile to have a drinking contest with the likes of General Dugu Wudi, but is it really worth it to compete with the owner of a small inn? The answer is obviously no. But what if the owner of this inn is a Tian Xian expert? The conclusion would naturally be reversed. Who is right and who is wrong will be judged by the public, and I will make sure you are convinced. Jun Moxie smiled, revealing his white teeth. Because his mood suddenly became incomparably good, he looked at Old Song like a hungry wolf staring at a fat lamb. Even Old Song, who is a heaven stage expert, couldn't help but shiver inexplicably. How can this kid's eyes be so evil? That's for the best. Young man, a bet must be fair, what if you lose? The middle-aged man seemed to be eager to see the world in chaos. In his eyes, Old Song is not a simple character, but this mysterious young man is even more unfathomable. Perhaps this bet between the two will be very interesting. Why would a spectator be afraid of making a big deal out of it? Otherwise, what else can I do besides watch the fun and entertain myself? The middle-aged man's eyes flashed a trace of bitterness. If you lose, I only hope that in the future, no matter what happens, you will never talk about the quality of the wine, because you are not worthy. Old Song fixed his eyes on Jun Moxie. Admittedly, your point of view on wine is very reasonable, but you still cannot insult the wine itself. After all, this is a craft passed down from generation to generation, so before you truly understand the quality of the wine, it is better not to judge it. It's a deal. Jun Moxie replied without hesitation. If he were to lose in the face of such inferior wine, then he would really be laughing his head off. Wait. The middle-aged man couldn't wait to open his mouth and smile. For the sake of fairness, shouldn't there be a witness to this drinking contest? It can't be decided by the two of you judging the outcome, right? Even if both of you are fastidious people, you still have to avoid suspicion. This person is crazy about wine, how about I be the witness? Not only will I be the witness, but I will also be the judge and judge. These two people's words are so fierce, the wine they will bring out will naturally not be ordinary. If I am the judge, then I will have the opportunity to taste two wines at the same time. Regardless of who wins, I will be able to taste two great wines. This is a great joy in life. The middle-aged man couldn't help but feel happy at this thought. Old Song, Old Song, you should bring out the wine under your bed this time, haha, good. Old Song, of his heart, Old San suddenly felt a little nervous. Old San, old Song, old man. Old said. Old of Old Song suddenly felt, Old San felt a bit more of worry. Of the feeling of Old Xia, he felt suddenly feel. Suddenly, of old. Thinking of this, Old Song's heart suddenly calmed down, but in his heart, he still vaguely felt that if he lost, it might not be a bad thing. Perhaps it would be able to bring his winemaking skills to the next level. Even if he couldn't improve his skills, at least he would have a direction to move forward in. After 3 days, I will close early in the afternoon. Everyone will meet here, how about it? Old Song proposed. Jun Moxie smiled and nodded. But in his heart, he was thinking, this mysterious Tian Xian expert, does he have any organization behind him? Could it be Huang Huahal's people? Is it really like what he said, they are the same people? Jun Mo Xie thought back to the day when he had scared Old Song to the point where he had hurriedly run away. Jun Mo Xie looked at Old Song with a smile in his eyes. At that time, with his silver-level strength, he was able to scare away a Tian Xian expert. How satisfying was that? 2 caddies of beef, 2 jars of wine. A voice suddenly rang out, I will also be the judge for the wine competition in 3 days. His words were resolute, not allowing any refutation, as if he was a high and mighty emperor, announcing his decision to his subjects. This was no longer a question, but a confirmation, a conclusion, a certainty. But this voice, to the 3 people in the hotel, was no different than a sudden clap of thunder. The middle-aged man's 2 bodyguards must be secretly guarding not far away. Old Song himself was a Tian Xian expert, and Jun Moxie's spiritual power was incomparably strong. Moreover, he was an expert in concealment. But even so, they did not discover how and when this uninvited guest came. And this person was currently sitting behind the 3 of them, a few feet away. The 3 people turned their heads at the same time, only to see a person sitting at a table not far from their line of sight. Although he was sitting, he gave the impression that he was standing like a javelin. His back was straight, his face was handsome, and the contours of his face were clear. His face looked like it was carved out of marble, and was completely expressionless. Her long hair hung down naturally without any restraint, covering half of her face. This person was dressed in black, and although it was only noon, his black clothes matched his aura and facial expression, giving off a feeling that night had fallen. The feeling this person gave the 3 of them was that they didn't know how old he was. It didn't matter if they said he was 30, 40, 50, or even 80. It didn't matter if they said he was 80, this person must be an expert among experts, an expert at the pinnacle. From the moment he saw this person, Jun Moxie had come to this conclusion. This person had suddenly appeared in Tianxiang City, and his intentions were obvious. He must have come for the peak level 9 Xian core. Such a character, for any force, would be one of the strongest contenders. In addition to this, Jun Moxie also felt a very familiar aura from this person, the smell of loneliness. This kind of loneliness was a proud loneliness, a loneliness that looked down on everything. Just like in his previous life. Just like a lonely wolf king on the prairie, although lonely, but fearless, and did not want to change this loneliness, and in fact, was enjoying it. May I ask who you are? The middle-aged man and Old Song became vigilant. None other than a wine lover. The man lowered his eyes and said lightly, then it's settled. Now, bring the wine and beef, and quickly. Old Song lowered his eyes and said, Sir, please wait a moment. Then he turned around and went inside. The middle-aged man laughed and said, in that case, we will be waiting for your arrival 3 days from now. With his status and eyesight, he could naturally see that this person was not an ordinary person. In fact, it was very likely that this person was a legendary dragon. Moreover, since this person had said that he would come in 3 days to judge, then he must not have any malicious intentions. Such a person, it would be best not to offend him. Little brother, I will see you in 3 days. Haha, don't let this old man down. The middle-aged man laughed and waved at Jun Moxie, and then turned around to leave. After he went out, 2 guards came out from the shadows and followed behind him. Your Highness, do you want me to follow that young man and find out his identity? No need, it would be boring if I did that. The middle-aged man laughed, and then his face suddenly changed. That person who just went in, what's going on? Where did he come from? Did someone just go in? No. The 2 guards looked at each other and were very puzzled. Then, forget it. The middle-aged man was secretly alarmed. These 2 guards of his were Earth Xian level experts. Their strength was enough to protect him in the capital city. But, He didn't expect that these powerful guards couldn't even detect the shadow of that man a moment ago. Who was this person? In the hotel. June Moxie looked at the black-robed man with interest. He suddenly smiled and said, "How is the scenery of the grassland?" The black-robed man finally put an end to his indifferent expression when he said this. Then, he slowly raised his eyes, and looked at June Moxie. At this moment, June Moxie suddenly realized that the black-robed man's eyes were as vast as the boundless sea, as deep and mysterious as the night sky. It was a feeling that made people want to sink into it when they looked at each other. "You can see that I come from the grassland?" The black-robed man asked slowly. His tone was neither fast nor slow, but every word was very clear. It was as if he had said each word, but he did not seem to be gnashing his teeth. "Your shoes are not something that can be found in the Central Plains. Your belt is made of the unique colored hemp silk of the grassland. Are these enough?" June Moxie smiled and sat in front of him. "These alone are not enough." The black-robed man looked at the table in front of him. "Moreover, I did not allow you to sit in front of me. You are not worthy." "Not enough? Then let me say a few more things. Your body has the unique smell of the grassland." June Moxie smiled, "And there is the lonely smell of a lone wolf. I can smell it. Are these enough? I don't want to stand now, so I naturally want to sit down. Not to mention sitting down, I can even lie down." Then, June Moxie snorted coldly and said, "As for whether I am worthy or not, you have your own standards. Isn't it the same for me? If you are no longer qualified to drink with me, then I will naturally stand up." The black-robed man stared at him for a long time. Then, he suddenly smiled and said, "That's interesting. If that's the case, then you can sit down. There is no harm in lying down." This black-robed man was very strange. Even though he was smiling, he still gave off a cold and lonely feeling. It seemed that he was not smiling at June Moxie, but rather at the air. At this moment, Old Song's body was bent over. He was holding a jar of wine in one hand and a bowl of beef in the other. He looked at June Moxie, but did not say anything. Instead, he put the dishes on the table and turned around to leave. The black-robed man's eyes were still looking at the table. He picked up the jar of wine with one hand, and did not make the slightest sound. The clay seal on the jar disappeared, and a burst of refreshing fragrance of wine permeated the air. The man lightly said, "Tianxiang City is really extraordinary. Even the bartender is an intermediate-level Tianxian. Not bad, not bad. Interesting, interesting. Recommend a novel, Guyuju's official voice. If you like the officialdom of the city, you can check it out. Everyone, I have good news to report. We are going to move. I just had my measurements taken today. The bungalow I'm currently living in can be exchanged for 2 3-bedroom apartments." Ha ha, I'm so excited that I combed my hair in front of the full-length mirror and laughed out loud 3 times gracefully. Chapter 151. Today's first update. I'll try to work through the night. Since it's the weekend, I'll go all out. I'll open my hand and ask for a monthly ticket. Old Song's body trembled, a blue light flashed around him, but he eventually calmed down. With a hoarse voice, he said, "Your eyes are like a torch, this old man admires you. But this old man is only a candle in the wind, I'm barely able to make a living here. As for the bartender or Tianxian, I don't care about them anymore." The man in black said lightly, "If it's just wine making, then it's not bad. As for other things, it's better not to think about them." Old Song's body stopped, but he didn't turn around. He said in a low voice, "Thank you for your advice." June Moxie smiled faintly and said, "Old Song, give me 2 jars of your wine. Today, this young master will also make an exception and spoil the food." Old Song complied, and then left. In his heart, he was shocked at this strange youth's boldness. With the black-cloaked man's cultivation, he could easily kill June Moxie a few times over, yet this kid was still so unscrupulous. "You don't want to drink my wine?" This time, it was the black-cloaked man's turn to be surprised. I never take advantage of others. If I drink your wine, wouldn't I owe you a favor? There are many debts in this world, but a favor is the most difficult to repay. June Moxie smiled. Moreover, I bought it with my own money, wouldn't it be more comfortable to drink it? That makes sense. The black-cloaked man said, then didn't say anything else. He picked up his bowl and drained it in one gulp. Wiping his mouth, he said, this wine is really good, much better than the horse milk wine. But this beef is a bit overcooked, but it's still edible. At this time, the wine that June Moxie ordered arrived. June Moxie didn't stand on ceremony and opened the seal to drink. His drinking speed wasn't any slower than the black-cloaked man's. Although the two were sitting at the same table, they didn't pay attention to each other, only focused on eating and drinking. The black-cloaked man drank very slowly, maintaining the same speed, neither fast nor slow. Even the way he drank and the way he ate the beef was unhurried, natural and unrestrained. Although he was sitting there and drinking, he still seemed to be in his own little world, independent of the outside world. Even the people and things around him seemed to be excluded. After drinking 7 or 8 bowls of wine, the black-cloaked man suddenly discovered something. This discovery made his impression of the youth in front of him improve by several levels. He discovered that although he was drinking alone, the youth's expression and movements were even more lonely than his. He was drinking out of loneliness, enjoying himself. But this young man in front of him didn't seem to be drinking wine. What he was directly tasting was loneliness. It was loneliness. It was as if the wine bowls in front of this young man were filled with loneliness and desolation. At his level, he was still in the realm of dispelling loneliness, but this youth was already enjoying loneliness. To be able to endure loneliness was already extremely open-minded, but to enjoy loneliness, what kind of level did one need? Putting aside what kind of level one needed, the latter seemed to be higher than the former. Who was this mysterious youth? Although these two lonely people were sitting at the same table and had almost the same charm, they were repelling each other. Although June Moxie couldn't integrate into the black-cloaked man's world, it was also extremely difficult for the black-cloaked man to enter June Moxie's atmosphere. After a long time, the black-cloaked man suddenly realized that he was paying attention to the youth and was unconsciously attracted to him, but the youth didn't notice him at all. It was as if the youth didn't care about him at all. The black-robed man's Xian Qi cultivation had obviously reached an extremely high transcendent realm. Naturally, he could tell at a glance that the Xian Qi cultivation of the young man in front of him was almost pitiful. Considering his age, such a cultivation could only be regarded as a very ordinary level, or even trash. He was afraid that he could blow him to death with a casual blow of air. But how could such a young man cultivate such a state of mind? Cultivation was easy to obtain. As long as one was a disciple of a relatively big family, as long as he diligently practiced the family's Xian Qi cultivation method from young, and with the guidance of experts, it was not surprising that he could achieve a certain level of cultivation at such a young age. However, it was difficult to obtain a state of mind. For a high-level martial artist to improve to a deeper level, he needed a corresponding state of mind. This was not something that could be achieved by the so-called guidance of experts, or by closed-door training. Moreover, he was so young. No, it was not an exaggeration to say that this youth was young. Young man, you are very special. The black-cloaked man said slowly. Then do you think that I am qualified to sit here now? June Moxie did not even raise his head and continued to show off. Based on your age, you only have a 4th grade Xian Qi, and your meridians are also seriously injured. You are very different from others. Among the Xian practitioners, you are only considered to be very ordinary. However, based on the fact that you can drink in front of me and still maintain your calm heart, it seems that sitting with you is not an insult to this old man. The black-cloaked man showed a rare smile. Moreover, it seems that you are even more lonely than I am. With a young man's temperament, how can you be so lonely? You are really interesting. Everyone is the same, and you are also very interesting. June Moxie raised his head and looked at him. Lengling, what makes you special is that you know that I drink in front of you just to enjoy your loneliness. If your loneliness is a dish, then my loneliness is wine. It is a pity that the taste of a good dish has changed. It is a little rancid. June Imo-sia stood up, and casually threw down an ingot of silver. Interesting people also have boring moments, you really shouldn't have taken the initiative to speak. There are too many curious people in this world. Why must you add yourself to the list? He did not look back and left. Before he left, he said, you have already recognized my qualifications, but I stood up on my own. Ha, the black-robed man was startled. He suddenly recalled June Imo-sia's words from before, as for whether I'm worthy or not, and whether I'm qualified or not, you have your own standards. But, isn't it the same for me? If you are no longer qualified to drink with me, then I will naturally stand up. The black-cloaked man's face immediately changed. So it was this kid who said that he was not qualified? To think that I, the solitary eagle, have dominated the world. Ever since I became famous, no one has dared to be presumptuous in front of me. But now, this young man is saying that I am not qualified. He even mocked me right in front of me and left immediately after. This feeling is really strange. Thinking of what he had said just now, the solitary eagle could not help but laugh. It was indeed him who was curious and asked first. And it was the moment the young man answered his question, his mood suddenly collapsed and disappeared. If he had to say that he had ruined the young man's mood, it would be justifiable. Good lad. Even if you did not know who I am and spoke rudely, I will remember you. The solitary eagle had always been proud and aloof. He always pursued being a lone eagle in the sky, a lone wolf in the prairie. Before this, no one could enter his eyes. He had always despised others and did things his own way. He did not care about anything, let alone what others thought of him. But he never thought that he would be despised one day. He was despised by a young man who was much younger than him and whose xian qi cultivation was much lower than him, and after being despised, he had nothing to say. This was the most depressing thing for him. So, this Grandmaster of the Prairie was very angry. In 3 days, I will come and find trouble with you. Let's see if you can still say that I am not qualified. The solitary eagle chewed a mouthful of beef and suddenly laughed. When was the last time I laughed from the bottom of my heart? June Moxie was walking on the road, his heart full of pride. The hitman really did not know who the man in black was, and who he was did not matter to June Dashao. In fact, ever since the solitary eagle had entered the hotel, June Moxie had immediately discovered that this man was not ordinary. And when he had seen through old Song's cultivation, June Moxie was even more certain of this idea. Even with the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune, June Moxie was unable to see through old Song's cultivation, but this man was able to casually say that this man was at least at the same level as Shin Xian. Moreover, from this man, June Moxie could feel a familiar sense of loneliness. When the two looked at each other, June Moxie could see the calmness and arrogance in this man's eyes. Therefore, June Moxie concluded that this man was a peerless expert who had been attracted by the news of the Xian Dan, but this expert's goal was not necessarily the Xian Dan. This was because June Moxie could not see any desire to plunder from this man's eyes. In general, if this kind of person had a goal, they would usually have an imposing manner. June Moxie himself was this kind of person, so he concluded that this man did not have much interest in the Xian Dan. I am afraid that this man has an ulterior motive. But this kind of existence must know the method to use the peak of the 9th level Xian Dan. Therefore, his identity was secondary, and it was not a big deal even if he did not know. However, June Dashao had already locked onto him the method to use the peak of the 9th level Xian Dan. Therefore, June Moxie tried every possible way to attract his attention, but it was not enough. Therefore, from the moment June Moxie sat opposite him, he began to meticulously plan. From being ostracized, to attracting his attention, to being admired, to making him curious, to taking the initiative to speak, and finally to being despised, a strange person must have a strange way of doing things. Therefore, he had to do the exact opposite. Aren't you very arrogant? I am more arrogant than you. Don't you enjoy your solitude? Then how can you be more lonely than me? In the whole world, I am the only one who transmigrated from Earth. June Moxie suddenly felt that his current behavior was very similar to those ladies in his previous life. First, seducing, then acting coy, wanting to reject, and then shouting for help at the moment when the arrow was knocked on the bowstring, and then someone broke in to catch them in the act and blackmail them. Cough cough, vomit first. Based on the current situation, June Moxie's plan was very successful. At least until now, Solitary Eagle did not know that he had been inexplicably set up. Chapter 152. By the time June Moxie returned home, Tang Yuan had been waiting for him for a long time. It turned out that this guy had been waiting for June Xia ever since he had left the house. Tomorrow? June Xia crossed his legs and squinted his eyes. Tomorrow. Fatty Tang nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. His small eyes flashed with expectation. Third young master, my good brother, I'm counting on you. You promised me before. Fatty acted as if he wanted to pounce on the hitman and hug him. He was very excited. Fatty, don't be so mushy. Don't worry. As long as you do as I say, I'm sure nothing will go wrong. June Moxie wasn't boasting, but he was trying to comfort Fatty. June Dashao had been working hard these past few days. He had already sent people to investigate the old eunuch Zhu, and had investigated him thoroughly. Apart from his mysterious origins, he was famous for being impartial and impartial. No one should ever think of abusing his authority. Moreover, he was the most meticulous in his work and never sloppy. Therefore, His Majesty the Emperor was extremely at ease with anything that was handed over to him. Moreover, the old eunuch never betrayed His Majesty's trust, and had never made any mistakes. In addition, the old eunuch Zhu's body was crippled, but he had accumulated a very strange disease over the years, mysophobia. Mysophobia itself wasn't a big problem, and many people had it. It was nothing more than a love for cleanliness compared to the average person, and it wasn't a bad habit. However, the old eunuch Zhu's mysophobia had reached a very abnormal level. For example, he would bathe twice a day, regardless of the season, summer, autumn, or winter. No matter how busy he would bathe twice a day. After each bath, he would change his clothes from inside to outside. Even if someone touched a tree on the road, he would never touch it. Even His Majesty the Emperor couldn't do anything about it. It was said that when His Majesty once gave him a seat, this old eunuch actually took out a snow-white towel from his sleeve and wiped the chair from top to bottom. Only then did he sit on the chair with half of his buttocks raised. Before he could even warm his buttocks, he had to leave again. His Majesty had finished giving his orders. His Majesty was stunned. As for his personal belongings, no one should even think about touching them. No matter how precious the item was, as long as it was touched by others, it would be discarded. Of course, anyone who touched it would also have to pay a price. If their hands touched it, their hands would be chopped off. If their feet touched it, their feet would be chopped off. Regardless of which part of their body was touched carefully or not, there was only one word to describe it: no more. His Majesty's eyes were like torches, and he made the best use of people. He ordered old eunuch Zhu to be in charge of the imperial palace's hygiene. This move allowed old eunuch Zhu to hold great power, but it made the maids and eunuchs in the imperial palace complain incessantly. Ever since eunuch Zhu took charge of this area, the cleanliness of the entire Tianxiang imperial palace could be said to be #1 in the continent. The fact that old eunuch Zhu had mysophobia wasn't a secret at all. There were simply too many people who knew about this, and many of them had experienced it before. Thus, almost everyone was trying their best to avoid this old fellow, lest they offend this old pervert, regardless of whether they could provoke him or not. Otherwise, the consequences would only be making themselves unhappy in vain. June Moxie had no trouble finding out about this. But this time, June Moxie wanted to do the opposite. Destruction was always faster than construction. With eunuch Zhu's seriousness in his work, as long as there was nothing wrong with Tang Yuan's body, he would definitely report it. And after reporting it, the Tang family's old man had already arranged everything. Everything was a matter of course. So, if they wanted to eliminate Fatty, they could only do something to this old eunuch. And the only thing that could break his sense of responsibility was his extreme misophobia. Fatty, tomorrow, before Eunuch Zhu examines you, take this medicine 2 hours in advance. Then, when the time comes, this and this, this and this, everything will be settled. Jun Mo Xia winked at her. Then, wouldn't it be too disgusting? Tang Yuan pinched the life-saving pill, blinking his eyes in hesitation. Then, I don't care. In any case, I've already given you the idea. Think about it yourself. Do you want to go in and become a kowtowing bug, or come out and have fun? Choose one, whatever you like. Jun Moxie snorted twice. Don't. Tang Yuan grabbed the pill in his hand, the muscles on his fat face twitching. I'll fucking throw caution to the wind. Brave warrior, face it bravely. Jun Moxie patted his shoulder, his face full of deep affection. I will give you my blessing. You will succeed. I will silently support you with my spirit. If you can take my place when I get beaten up, that would be for the best. Tang Yuan grumbled. After this, the old man will probably skin me alive. In order to complete this matter, the family spent a lot of money. All I can say is, I really sympathize with you. Jun Moxie let out a long sigh, his face full of emotions. After this matter blows over, I will go see you. Don't forget. Before you go, do not forget one thing. Do not eat breakfast. Tang Yuan nodded his head solemnly. I will remember. Fatty Tang walked away, and Jun Mo Xia continued to laugh until he was far away. However, Jun Mo Xia couldn't even straighten his back as he squatted on the ground. In fact, Jun Mo Xia was very confident that he could screw this up. However, Jun Mo Xia had never expected that Fatty Tang would make such a huge blunder. And, this blunder had become a legend in the Xian continent. Tens of thousands of people talked about it with relish, and never got tired of it. And, Tang Yuan's name had become famous throughout the world because of this incident. In fact, he had become a celebrity from head to toe. When Jun Daxiao found out about it, there was nothing else he could say. He could only sweat profusely. Tang Yuan walked out of the Jun family's residence, bumping into Jun Zhantian, who was returning with his entourage. Both sides walked face to face. Tang Yuan knew that he could not hide. Besides, he was too big of a target and had no place to hide. He could only step forward and salute. Fatty, you came to find my family's Mo Xia again. Did you lose your wife again? Grandpa Jun glared at him. What are you up to this time? Mo Xia hasn't seen you much recently, but you've really grown a lot. Tang Yuan panicked. Isn't this just a little embarrassing? You're a dignified duke, do you have to keep talking about it and make things difficult for me, a junior? For a moment, he did not know how to answer and stammered. No. He subconsciously hid his hands behind his back. Nothing. This old man is a tiger. Why are you so scared? Grandpa Jun asked doubtfully. What's that in your hand? Stretch out your hand for me to see. No, it's nothing. Tang Yuan suddenly became extremely nervous. He shook his head and retreated step by step. Suddenly, he tripped over something and fell to the ground with a plop. Suddenly, the fat on the ground bounced up and down. Grandpa Jun Zhantian laughed. Look at how scared you are. Do you think that with this old man's status, I would snatch something from you? He ignored him and walked through the door while laughing. Tang Yuan wiped his cold sweat and stood up. He was still in a daze when he realized that the pill in his hand had disappeared. He must have dropped it when he fell earlier. This was no small matter. He crawled on the ground and looked for it for a long time before he found it again. This shock, and anxiety caused him to break out in cold sweat. Tang Yuan became confused and could not remember Jun Moxie's instructions clearly. He racked his brains and thought for a long time. Only when he reached the door of his house did he remember, yes, please don't forget to eat breakfast. Sigh, after knowing about this matter, I didn't even have the mood to eat. However, since third young master said so, he must have his reasons. I can only reluctantly eat breakfast. With this thought in mind, coupled with the intense exercise just now, his stomach began to growl. Early the next morning, Tang Yuan ate until his belly was as round as a ball. Burping, he followed his father. He staggered all the way to the imperial palace on his horse, which was swaying from side to side under his weight. Minister Tang looked around proudly. For the sake of Du Ju's accident, he had invited many doctors to examine his son's body. He was sure that there would be no accident this time. Aside from his son being a little fat, there would be no other problems. Therefore, Minister Tang was very confident. What was there to be afraid of being a little fat? As the saying goes, a gentleman is not dignified if he is not fat. Minister Tang looked at his son, who was struggling to move his horse. For the first time, he felt that his son's fat body was quite pleasing to the eye. How joyous! Everyone had their own thoughts on the way to the imperial palace. Fatty Tang waited for an opportunity to swallow the pill given by June Moxie. He felt that his throat was a little dry, so he grabbed a water ladle and gulped down half of the cold water. Only then did he feel much better. There were a total of 9 people participating in the selection. 4 of them were chosen by the big families, and the other 5 were recommended by the officials. Minister Tang had put in a lot of effort for his son's future in order to get through so many strong opponents. What he didn't know was that his son was having a headache about this matter. Moreover, his son had already discussed with his best friend, June Moxie, how to ruin his plan. If those 2 people succeeded in their plan, Minister Tang would lose everything he had invested in this time. Now, it was no longer an if. Minister Tang was destined to lose everything this time. Eunuch Zhu's appraisal method was very scientific. He would enter from one side and go home from the other. He didn't want to meet anyone who hadn't been tested yet. Therefore, as more and more people entered, the remaining people became more and more nervous. It was said that although Murong Qianjun passed the test last time, he had to walk outside for more than a month. Everyone knew about this. What kind of examination would make Murong Qianjun walk outside? The more people thought about it, the more their legs trembled. They suddenly felt a sense of sympathy. Chapter 153. After 2 more people, it would be Tang Yuan's turn. Fatty Tang tensed up as he turned his fat and short neck to look around. His eyes were locked on Minister Tang, who was sitting upright in his armchair. Minister Tang knew that his son was unwilling, so he kept an eye on him, afraid that he would run away. Now that he saw him looking around, how could he not know what his son was thinking? He shouted in a low voice, "You brat, you better behave yourself." Fatty Tang shrunk his neck and mumbled a few words, then turned around. Suddenly, he felt his stomach rumble, and his face paled. He turned around and shouted, "I want to, what the hell are you thinking?" Minister Tang glared at him. "If you don't pass this time, I'll break your legs when I get home. If you say one more word, I'll break your legs right now." Tang Yuan's face paled, and he sat down, clutching his stomach. Gradually, the feeling disappeared, and he felt a little relieved. He couldn't help but feel bitter. Didn't June Moxie say that the pill was only for Qi? Why does it feel wrong now? He didn't know that June Moxie had said, "Don't eat breakfast," but Fatty Tang had said, "Don't forget to eat breakfast." These were 2 extremes, completely twisted. Moreover, he had drunk a ladle of cold water, which neutralized the effect of the pill, and was like a tiger that had grown wings. The results of today's test may be the same, but the process, whispers could be heard from the side. It was a young man from the Meng clan and a candidate from the Song clan. "Brother Song, do you know how that Zhu, His Excellency, did the inspection?" I don't know, but I heard that after the examination, it will be terrible." The young man surnamed Song said in a small voice. "What's so terrible about it?" Tang Yuan raised his voice. "Murong Qianjun will be out for a few months after the examination." "So what?" Both of you will definitely be able to withstand it. As soon as he said this, the two youths' faces immediately turned pale. Minister Tang fiercely looked at Tang Yuan and interrupted him. But in his heart, he was proud. It seemed that his son had learned how to attack his opponents. His efforts were not in vain. Tang Yuan sat on the chair and waited with a clear conscience. As soon as he stopped talking, he suddenly felt a reaction in his stomach. He immediately twisted left and right, as if there were maggots growing under his buttocks. His expression became even weirder. He couldn't hold it in any longer. He couldn't help but curse Jun Moxie in his heart. That bastard gave me a laxative, and he said it was to stimulate my breathing. Just as he was about to throw caution to the wind and take care of it, a voice came from inside. Next, Tang Yuan. Tang Yuan exclaimed, his fat face turning green. Shrinking in the chair, he did not move. Tang Shang was secretly pleased with himself, but when he suddenly saw Fatty's action, he couldn't help but jump up in anger. He shouted, "Evil creature! Your name is called, hurry up and go in." He flew up and kicked Tang Yuan's fat buttocks. Tang Yuan let out a strange cry as he waved his hands and feet as he fell inside. As soon as Tang Yuan entered, he was led by a young eunuch through a long corridor and into a small room. As soon as he entered, he felt cold. Thick curtains blocked out the autumn sun. Tang Yuan suddenly felt cold all over. Especially the old eunuch opposite him. His face was as white as snow, and his white robe was spotless. Even his socks were white, and his eyebrows and beard were even whiter. From head to toe, there was no other color. Tang Yuan suddenly thought of the legendary Soul Reaper, and his whole body trembled. Miraculously, his stomach didn't feel so uncomfortable. Tang Wanli's grandson. Take it off. Eunuch Zhu's name was very strange, Zhu Zhu Zhu. He looked at Fatty and spoke in an emotionless tone. His spotless right hand pointed at the snow-white cloth in front of him. Take off your clothes and stand on it. If it was a beautiful woman in front of him, Fatty Tang would definitely take off his clothes faster than anyone else. But the problem now was that the person in front of him wasn't a beautiful woman. Not only was he not a beautiful woman, he wasn't even a man. He was a eunuch that was neither male nor female. Fatty Tang immediately felt a psychological barrier. He dilly-dallied and refused to take off his clothes. Eunuch Zhu's white eyebrows twitched. He raised his eyelids slightly and snorted. He sat cross-legged on the chair without moving, but an enormous pressure immediately surged towards him. In an instant, Fatty Tang felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. Eunuch, can you, please, turn around first? Fatty Tang's eyebrows twitched as he gripped his belt with both hands. Take it off. Eunuch Zhu Lengleng rolled his eyes and said in an unquestionable tone. He really was a man of few words. Hurry up. He didn't have the slightest bit of politeness towards the eldest son of the Ministry of Revenue's minister. Oh. Fatty's entire body trembled. His stomach began to churn again. He had just unbuckled his belt when he turned around with a bitter expression. Eunuch, can I first? Tang Yuan had already given up. I'll just go with the flow. This daddy's pants are about to fall off, humph. Eunuch Zhu didn't seem to like talking. His eyes flashed fiercely as he slowly extended his finger. Suddenly, a blue light flashed from his fingertip. With a few swishing sounds, several blue rays of light shot out like swords. Fatty Tang's loose robes fluttered like butterflies, instantly revealing a body full of excess fat. His enormous stomach almost reached his knees. Fatty Tang let out a strange cry. He wanted to cover his nether regions with his hands, but he slapped his stomach instead. It wasn't that Fatty's hands were short, but that his stomach was too big, covering his target completely. Zhu 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 clasped her hands behind her back and stood up with a cold expression on her face. She walked down from her seat with her hands behind her back. Her snow-white figure fluttered and circled around Fatty Tang's naked body. Her sharp gaze had already examined every part of Fatty Tang's exposed body. Raise your left hand and reveal your armpit. Zhu 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 Lengleng commanded, and Fatty Tang hurriedly obeyed. Although it was already autumn, the temperature in the room was still quite high. Even though he wasn't wearing a single piece of clothing, he didn't feel cold. However, as Eunuch Zhu approached, Fatty felt a genuine chill. It was a bone-piercing chill, and even his tumbling stomach was forcefully suppressed by the chill. Zhu 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 stood 3 feet away, his eyes like cold lightning as he continuously ordered, "Raise your right hand. Use your hand to hug your stomach and reveal your lower part. Put it down, spread your legs, and spread them wide." Perhaps he was slowly getting used to the old eunuch's pressure, but the chill gradually lost its effect. Tang Yuan's face became more and more sallow, beads of sweat the size of soybeans dripping down his face. His legs trembled, and he really couldn't hold it in any longer. Zhu Zhu Zhu's clothes were whiter than snow, and her face was completely expressionless. She nodded and floated 2 steps closer. Lengleng said, "Bend down and raise your buttocks." It's here, it's finally here." Tang Yuan wailed in his heart. "I don't want to walk outside, boo-hoo, this old pervert. To think that this young master still couldn't escape from his evil clutches. Hurry up." Zhu 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 clasped her hands behind her back as Lengleng urged. Tang Yuan hesitated and slowly bent down, but this made it even harder for him to control himself, and he almost burst out. He also knew that if he really did burst out, then things would get out of hand. He hurriedly stood up straight and forcefully endured it, but after trying a few times, he couldn't bend down anymore. If he bent down again, he really wouldn't be able to control himself. Old Eunuch Zhu was furious, thinking that Fatty was purposely playing tricks on him. He floated up and directly stepped on Tang Yuan's fat neck, forcefully pressing down. Tang Yuan immediately bent down by 90 degrees. Then, Zhu 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 used 2 wooden sticks in her hands to support his buttocks. Then, she slightly bent down, frowned, and moved closer. She concentrated her energy in her eyes and fixed her gaze. At this time, Tang Yuan finally couldn't bear it any longer. His body contracted, and his throat cried out in pain. Only a poo sound was heard, and a tragedy suddenly occurred. A golden substance surged out from the gap between Fatty's plump August 15th. At this moment, old Eunuch Zhu was right in front of him. He had never thought that he would encounter something like this in his entire life, and it was too late for him to dodge. Minister Tang sat calmly outside. With his status, he naturally had his own eunuchs serving the Forbidden Palace's tribute tea. He leisurely tasted it while blowing the tea powder on the surface of the water, and confidently waited for his son's news. He knew that all the youths who came here, although they would be treated by old Eunuch Zhu, would definitely pass the physical examination. The only thing that mattered was the financial resources of each family, as well as their relationship with the inner court. And in all of these, no one could compete with him, the Minister of Revenue. Beside him, there were a few other officials who were also here to send their sons and nephews to be examined. They greeted him uncomfortably and smiled dryly. Anyone could see that the Tang family was determined to get the position of the commander of the inner court guards. Most of the younger generation of the Tang family would have to accompany them this time. Minister Tang snorted. "These people want to compete with me, Minister Tang? Ha ha ha, what a joke." Just then, suddenly, a furious roar came from inside the inner room. That roar was filled with a pain that was worse than death, extreme regret and extreme hatred. It was as if a lifetime of persistence had turned into nothing in an instant. It was as if a heart was being torn apart. It was the voice of old Eunuch Zhu. It was also an extremely angry voice. "Get lost. Not qualified." These 4 words were like 4 claps of thunder, exploding in the sky above Tianxiang City. No less than 10 million people heard it at the same time, and everyone who heard it could hear the extreme hatred in that voice. Even Jun Imo Xia, who was far away at the Jun family's residence, had heard this sharp and peculiar voice. He suddenly laughed until his eyebrows disappeared. He proudly picked up the teapot, and fiercely drank a mouthful of tea. Then, he slapped his thigh, got up, and turned around in a half-circle. "Fatty Tang. I didn't think that you'd actually do it." You're worthy of being my future partner. Good job. That's more like it. When have we ever made a mistake? He paused for a moment, and then couldn't help but laugh out loud. I really want to see that old eunuch's face right now. I want to see how interesting it is. Jun Dashao didn't know that the expression on old eunuch Zhu's face right now was 1,000,000 times more interesting than he had imagined. Chapter 154. Little Ku was so frightened by her young master that she trembled. She asked timidly, "Young master, are you all right?" She thought to herself, young master has finally turned over a new leaf for a few months, why is his expression so strange today? There's a hint of the wretched and despicable look he used to have in the past. Please don't turn back into the profligate son of a rich family in the palace. Following that angry roar, a huge naked body suddenly shot out like a meteor with a bang, directly smashing into the last hard wall, creating a human-shaped hole. With a "pa" sound, a lump of rotten meat fell heavily to the ground. At the same time, an indescribable stench filled the air in an instant. Tang Yuan, Fatty Tang. But at this moment, he was already completely unconscious. Blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, his eyes were tightly shut, and his naked body was sprawled on the ground. There was even a patch of yellow between his crotch. On his originally perfectly round buttocks, there was a deep palm print. The print was ferociously purplish-green, and the edges of the palm print were swollen. There was even blood clotting inside, and it was purplish-black. Perhaps his bones were broken. To be able to break a bone in that area, how much strength did one have to use? Everyone present felt as if they were struck by lightning, their eyebrows twitching wildly. They really couldn't figure out what this fatty had done to cause the usually cold and aloof elder Zhu to be so furious. How tragic, and too pitiful, he was actually beaten to this state, and even the 5 grains reincarnation items were beaten out. In the palace, elder Zhu's face was filled with despair, his entire body trembling like a sieve. His previous temperament, cold, calm, and arrogant attitude, had all disappeared. Old man Zhu's face was covered in yellow stuff, even covering his eyes, snow-white hair, snow-white eyebrows, snow-white robe, snow-white. In short, there were specks of yellow on many important parts of his body. The scariest thing was that he vomited first, into his mouth. Jun Mo Xie's plan and Tang Yuan's cooperation had been a freak combination of factors. The timing that old man Zhu had chosen was simply too coincidental. Tang Yuan had been enduring for a long time, but he finally couldn't bear it any longer. And, the water had flowed downwards like a waterfall, and had spouted straight down to, the correct explanation was that the Yellow River had overflowed and burst its banks. Minister Tang was furious. Anyone who saw their son being beaten up to the point where he turned from a slightly fatter person into a pile of broken meat would be furious. Why? My son is just a little bit fatter. Even if you, old eunuch Zhu, had the power to decide the life and death of this pass, at most, you could just say that you didn't pass. Was there a need to beat someone to such a state? This was too much. It seemed like Fatty only had one last breath left. Speaking of which, Fatty Tang's life was saved in such an accident, it was really a blessing from his ancestors. Jun Moxie had only wanted him to fart at the critical moment, but this bastard had changed the doctor's order without permission, and had become even more aggressive, causing the Yellow River to burst. Old eunuch Zhu, who was obsessed with cleanliness, had suffered such an unexpected disaster today. Not killing him on the spot was already giving His Majesty the Emperor a lot of face, giving Minister Tang a lot of face. Zhu. What do you mean by this? Give this old man an explanation. Minister Tang shouted loudly, his whole body trembling in pain. Looking at his son's miserable condition, he wished he could tear Zhu into 1,000 pieces. After a long time, a gloomy voice full of ruthlessness shouted from Lengleng, Tang Qianyu, if it wasn't for that old man Tang Wanli, neither of you would have walked out of here alive. Now, pick up your bastard son and disappear from this old man's sight. Don't wait for this old man to change his mind and leave both of you here. Everyone outside, get out of here. Finally, there was a thunderous roar, followed by a heart-wrenching sound of vomiting. It was obvious that old eunuch Zhu was vomiting very violently, but why? It was said that old eunuch Zhu was obsessed with cleanliness. Could it be that the yellow and white thing under Fatty was burping in response? Everyone outside looked at each other in dismay as they made their guesses. Then, they all ran away. The smell here was too strong. As for Minister Tang, although he was angry, he didn't dare to talk back. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him, so he quickly took his son to get treatment. By the time Minister Tang understood the truth, it was already the next day. Old man Tang Wanli angrily went to the imperial palace to seek justice for his grandson. Just thinking about it made him feel aggrieved. I've been friends with old eunuch Zhu for decades. Not only did you not ask to let my grandson go, but you actually beat him up like this? This is really intolerable. The final result of seeking justice was that old Master Tang thoroughly understood the meaning of intolerable, so he came back with a face full of dirt and flew into a rage. He had to execute the family law on Fatty Tang. All the women of the Tang family, including old Madam Tang and Fatty Tang's mother, all knelt on the ground. After much effort, old Master Tang didn't succeed. Speaking of which, Fatty was indeed seriously injured this time. Apart from the serious external injuries, he also had some internal injuries. If he was really baptized by the family law, he might really be able to pass. However, the repercussions were still severe. Elder Tang and Minister Tang were both anxious and heartbroken. After all, for the sake of this matter, the Tang family had poured in a lot of money and favors. It wasn't easy to get through all the connections. As soon as old eunuch Zhu passed the test, the whole family would prepare a celebratory feast. However, at this incomparably critical moment, Fatty Tang's surging, like the Yellow River, was overflowing. And this time, it wasn't just a mere description. It was literally surging, straight to the face, body, mouth of old eunuch Zhu, who had always been a clean freak. Not to mention old eunuch Zhu, who had always been a clean freak, no one could stand it. Both old Master Tang and Minister Tang were so angry at Tang Yuan's earth-shattering action that they lay on the bed. Grandpa Tang laid on the bed with a dull look in his eyes. He kept repeating, "I've always heard about having diarrhea at a critical moment, but I always thought it was just a joke. Now, I finally know that this strange and evil thing really does exist." Just because it's strange and rare doesn't mean it won't happen. Fatty Tang had just regained consciousness and was still seriously injured when he was chased out of the house by old Master Tang in a rage. "From today onwards, you are no longer my grandson. You are no longer a member of the Tang family. Get out of my sight. Disappear forever." Things had really gotten out of hand. Fatty was still very loyal. Even under such circumstances, he still didn't choose to betray June Moxie. He wailed twice as he was escorted by a group of female soldiers towards the June family's house. This was also the only place Fatty Tang could seek refuge in at the moment. It was also the place that Grandma Tang had designated for her grandson. There were 3 reasons. First, Tang Yuan and June Moxie were best friends. If he didn't seek refuge with him at this time, who else could he seek refuge with? Second, Fatty was injured, and his injuries weren't light. At least he would have a companion at June Moxie's place. In any case, June Moxie was also recognized as a good-for-nothing, right? Third, the 2 houses weren't far apart. The female soldiers could visit at any time. When leaving the Tang family, Tang Yuan issued 2 orders. First, take away the big cabinet in my room. Second, beat the guy who washes my clothes to death. The first order was easy to understand. The big cabinet contained all of Tang Yuan's personal savings over the years. The amount was not small. Naturally, he had to bring it with him. In the future, he would have to rely on it to settle down. As for the was Herman, that was where Tang Yuan was vicious and merciless. He was a gifted scholar. Moreover, he was a famous scholar from the Golden Scholar competition. Tang Yuan had deliberately abused this hypocrite scholar and kept him here to wash his clothes. It could be said that he hated Tang Yuan to the bone. Now that Tang Yuan had been expelled from the family, this fellow was equivalent to being free. Based on this black-bellied scholar's character, he could easily slip out and find a master to oppose Tang Yuan. It seemed that this kind of thing was completely possible for that genius to do. And Tang Yuan naturally didn't want such a ticking time bomb to exist. In any case, he didn't know when he would return, so it was better to get rid of him as soon as possible. Fatty Tang was currently in a semi-conscious state. After receiving a torrent of abuse from his grandfather and father, he was still able to think of this matter. It was really not easy. When he arrived at the Jun residence, Jun Zhantian was laughing arrogantly in his grandson's small courtyard. With Grandpa Jun's lofty status, it was only natural that he would be the first to hear of such an amusing matter. Tang Wanli's grandson had actually defecated in the mouth of one of the Forbidden Palace's top experts, Zhu Zhu Zhu. Such explosive news had been verified by Grandpa Jun. He had laughed all the way home. When he returned, Jun Moxie suddenly looked like a chicken that had been struck by lightning. He stood there in a daze. Oh my God, Fatty, you really dared to release such a fiery script. According to the information that the hitman had gathered from various sources, it seemed that Eunuch Zhu was at least a Tianxian expert. In fact, his strength wasn't even below that of his grandfather, Jun Zhantian. What kind of person was that? Seeing that his grandson had no intention of laughing after hearing such a hilarious joke and was in a daze instead, the old man asked in bewilderment. Jun Moxie held his head in his hands. He looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time as he said, "This idea, it seems like it's possible, maybe it should be me." Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui both choked at the same time. They looked at Jun Moxie, dumbfounded. Although he added a few uncertain words at the beginning, this information was even more explosive. If Eunuch Zhu knew that this matter was not an accident but man-made, then, Jun Zhantian and his son were both drenched in sweat. My original intention was for him to let out a fart while Eunuch Zhu was inspecting his buttocks. So I gave him a pill to stimulate his breath. Jun Moxie innocently looked at his grandfather and uncle. Fatty Tang didn't want to become an official, so, who would have thought that this matter, which was originally quite easy to handle, would become like this under Fatty's hands. God makes fools of people. Chapter 155. Jun Zhantian and Jun Wui didn't know that the matter with Fatty Tang was just a child's play. Not only was the root cause of this matter Jun Moxie had been involved, but everything that had happened in the capital over the past few months, including the explosion of the Imperial Tutor Li's Dantian, the visit of the Imperial Tutor, and the visit of the Imperial Tutor, had led to Tianxiang City becoming a place where gold Xian Yuxian was rarely seen in the past. Earth Xian experts, Tianxian experts, and Shen had been guarding the city from the shadows. All of these strange situations had been traced back to this innocent and smiling brat. This matter ends here. It must not be leaked. Grandpa Jun was, after all, a shrewd and astute person. That old bastard Tang Wanli is probably half crazy right now. His eyes are green with greed and he wants to find someone to cause trouble for him. Just keep this matter to yourself. As long as that fatty Tang Yuan doesn't say anything, just pretend that nothing happened. At this point, Jun Zhantian sighed and said, "Fortunately, it was Tang Wanli's grandson. If it was someone else's grandson, I'm afraid he would have been killed by Zhu 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 on the spot. Yeah, this is a very dangerous thing to do. Let alone old eunuch Zhu, even old man Tang might not be willing to let this matter rest if it were to be known by others." "What do you mean by that? Could it be that Tang Wanli's grandson was special? Although Fatty and I weren't sincere in our actions, it was just a mischievous act by the younger generation. It shouldn't be that serious, right? Could there be some hidden story behind this?" Jun Moxie really didn't understand. Although old eunuch Zhu was an expert of Tianxian and had an extraordinary status in the palace, he shouldn't have gone so far. That Zhu 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 is not just an ordinary eunuch. Yeah, I know that you have improved a lot recently. However, you still need to be more cautious in your actions in the future. It is better to be safe than sorry. Grandpa Jun said earnestly. Grandpa Mo Xia also knows that old eunuch Zhu is a Tian Xian expert, but he is still a eunuch. You won't tell me that he was originally a great general, right? Jun Dashao said disdainfully. Hitman Jun looked down on those who willingly mutilated themselves to enter the palace as slaves. Mo Xia, this is really your fault. How could you have known that Zhu was not just a general in the past? His position in the Tianxiang Empire's army was only below that of old Dugu and me. Only 2 or 3 other people could compare to him. It's just that fate makes a fool out of us. The old man sighed with emotion. Ah! Could it be? At this time Jun Wui interrupted, Father, you said that old eunuch Zhu, could it be that he is actually the great general Zhu Zonglong who was as famous as you and Dugu Zongheng? But didn't he die in battle? Grandpa Jun shook his head. Other than His Majesty, this old man, Tang Wanli and a few others, no one else knows about this secret. Back when His Majesty was still the crown prince, he and Zhu Zonglong led the army into battle. This old man led the right army and Dugu Zongheng led the left army. At that time, Tianxiang was only a small country in its embryonic form. During that battle, the central army was ambushed and we were unable to rescue them in time. The crown prince, together with 2 generals, Tang Wanli and Zhu Zonglong, were captured. The enemy was determined to humiliate the crown prince and destroy the morale of our army. At that time, Zhu Zonglong was handsome, so he pretended to be the crown prince and was imprisoned in the Carrion River. Carrion Stream? Jun Wui and Jun Moxie looked at each other and understood. Just from the name, one could imagine what kind of place that was. This old man rushed hundreds of miles to rescue the crown prince, and fought to the death with the enemy. At the last moment, they used Zhu Zonglong to threaten me. At that time, Zhu Zonglong's body was no longer in human shape. The Carrion Stream is filled with poisonous insects, snakes, and rats. When he entered, he had already suffered from serious injuries. Moreover, his Xian Qi was sealed. His entire body was bitten by tens of thousands of poisonous insects. Even his crotch area was in a mess, a pity for a great general, just like that. Grandpa Jun sighed in melancholy. So that's how it is. No wonder such an expert was a eunuch. No wonder he had such a serious obsession with cleanliness, Jun Moxie finally understood. No wonder eunuch Zhu was so favored in the palace. If it wasn't for him, then His Majesty the Emperor would have been the one to bear all of this. Jun Moxie couldn't help but regret that he had insulted this respectable general. This was another part of the Hitman Jun's charm. He would admit his mistakes if he was wrong. Of course, he would only admit his mistakes in his heart. His mouth would still be a dead duck's mouth. In the end, our side fought back and won a great victory. But Zhu Zonglong was completely disheartened. Moreover, he was injured and sick. His appearance was haggard, and he no longer had the courage to live. For the next few days, he refused medical treatment. He didn't eat or drink. He was determined to die. Tang Wanli was with him at that time. He said, "You saved my life. If you don't live, then I won't live either." So he went on a hunger strike. For the first 3 days, Zhu Zonglong was indifferent. He was on the verge of death. Tang Wanli held a knife in front of him. He cut off pieces of his own flesh. He said, "If you continue to be like this, then I will cut myself into a skeleton in front of you. That way, I won't be able to bear seeing you die first." Jun Wui and Jun Moxie looked at each other. Their hearts were filled with horror. Recalling the tragic atmosphere at that time, they could not help but feel their souls throbbing. They remembered the high righteousness of those old men. They were even more fascinated. Until Tang Wanli cut himself 33 times. He cut off 33 pieces of his flesh. Zhu Zonglong suddenly burst into tears. From then on, he began to eat and drink. Tang Wanli collapsed. His injuries were much more serious than Zhu Zonglong's. Jun Zhantian sighed. After the war, the crown prince ascended the throne. Tang Wanli was conferred the title of nobility. Zhu Zonglong refused. He voluntarily entered the palace and changed his name to Zhu 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 to protect His Majesty's safety. Until now. So the army had one more general, Zhu Zonglong, who sacrificed his life for the country. And the palace had one more chief, Zhu Zhu Zhu. To this day, the descendants of the Zhu family do not know that Zhu 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 is Zhu Zonglong. The change in appearance is too great. The room became silent as he finished narrating this secret. Even after so many years, Grandpa Jun was still able to slowly tell the story of the iron blood friendship between the senior heroes. It was still so soul-stirring. No wonder Grandpa Jun said that if he was not Tang Wanli's grandson, he would have been killed. So that's how it is. No wonder. Just as Grandpa Jun finished speaking, a servant came in to report, all of the Tang family's female soldiers had arrived at the Jun family's main gate with the severely injured and half-dead Tang Yuan, and were requesting an audience with Grandpa Jun. Grandpa Jun's scalp went numb. Could it be that my grandson has been exposed? They have come looking for me. With a perturbed heart, he came out to find out that Tang Yuan had been expelled from the Tang residence. However, his grandmother, mother, youngest aunt, and the other aunts were still worried. So after a discussion and under Fatty Tang's own request, they unanimously decided to temporarily stay at the Jun residence. The group of women were originally afraid that Grandpa Jun would not accept Fatty. After all, Fatty's unfilial reputation was there. With Grandpa Jun's character, it would be reasonable for him to refuse. Unexpectedly, Grandpa Jun nodded his head in agreement and sent Fatty and his personal maid to Jun Moxie's small courtyard to settle down. Feeling guilty, he thanked the female soldiers of the Tang family profusely and hurriedly slipped away. Cough cough, this was all because of my grandson's rotten idea. Seeing that there was no one around him, Tang Yuan laid on the bed with a mournful face. He struggled to raise his head and speak. Third young master, what did you do? You really killed me. His buttocks were nearly pierced through by Zhu Zhu's palm. It was estimated that in the next few months, this fellow could only lie on his stomach. You still said that it was an aphrodisiac? Fuck. That was an aphrodisiac, it was simply. Tang Yuan was full of energy. He gritted his teeth and looked ferocious. That was simply a laxative. Fuck, I felt that something was wrong the moment I entered the palace. I was barely able to control myself. Later on, that old eunuch used a wooden stick to mess with my chrysanthemum. Fuck. Brother, I couldn't control myself anymore. I spat it out. Stop it. Jun Moxie looked like he wanted to vomit blood. How could it be a laxative? How could I make a mistake when I made it myself? How could it be like this? I followed your instructions this morning, and ate a bellyful before I went to the imperial palace. Then, I ate that pill before I went to see the old eunuch Zhu. It's really strong, and then. Tang Yuan struggled to raise his head and accused Jun Mo Xia. He denounced with a tearful voice. What? Jun Moxie finally knew where the problem was. You ate breakfast this morning? Didn't I say it clearly yesterday? Didn't I tell you not to eat breakfast? Why did you still eat? Would it kill you to skip a meal? That was originally an aphrodisiac. It was more of a laxative than a laxative. Once there was something in your stomach, how could it be good? Tang Yuan was stunned. After being reminded, he immediately remembered. He immediately beat his chest and stamped his feet. So it was me who got it wrong. Alright, this can be considered as fulfilling your wish. You've achieved your original goal. Isn't it just a slap? Is there a need to do this? Jun Moxie was very disdainful. According to my original plan, you should have suffered a slap too. But you shouldn't have suffered so badly. Now you've pooped all over his face, body, and mouth. Blarg. Jun Moxie retched. It's already good enough that you're not beaten to death. That's right, I was scared to death at that time. You don't know, that old eunuch was actually an expert from Tianxian. He wielded a sky blue light sword and used his qi to control the sword. He easily stripped me naked but didn't hurt me at all. At that time, I couldn't control myself and thought that it was over. There must be no cure. But in the end, that old eunuch showed me mercy. I heard that it was because he was friends with my grandfather. If it was someone else, they would have been dead by now. Fatty Tang was somewhat proud of himself as he said this. Then, he heartlessly said, Grandpa has finally said that he's going to kick me out of the house. Fortunately, I've been prepared for this. I've saved up a lot of money over the years. Although it's not a lot, it's not a small amount either. This is called being prepared. He suddenly said nervously, Third young master, if you want to gamble, you're not allowed to steal my money. Times are different now, this is all I have. June Moxie was stunned. What's going on? So this guy doesn't have any reaction to being kicked out of the house? Fatty Tang winked. Third young master, what's wrong with you? We're all family. It's not like you don't know that I've been kicked out 3 times. Is there a need to be so surprised? I have to put on a show for the outsiders. June Moxie stared at him dumbfounded. Finally, his neck couldn't support his head anymore. His head free fell onto the coffee table and even bounced twice. Ahem, let's digress a little. After all, Fatty Tang is the first successor of the Tang family. It's impossible for him to just follow June Moxie around. Therefore, during this period of time, such a plot was arranged. Firstly, it's funny. Secondly, it can be considered as the establishment of the evil Monarch's faction. And, next, June Moxie will start to establish his own faction. Of course, there will be a lot of jokes. Whether it's a battle of wits or strength, it will be very enjoyable. Please rest assured. During this period of time, Feng Ling's updates have not been satisfactory. I apologize for this. After all, the results of this book are not bad. However, the better the results are, the more pressure there is. Feng Ling won't overestimate himself and say that it's a classic. However, Feng Ling can guarantee that every scene in the book is something that no one has seen before. At least, in a certain aspect, it's unexpected. Currently, we are also working hard in this direction. Of course, the environment of a different world may be similar. Brothers and sisters, please forgive and support me on this point. Chapter 156. Your whole family is this young master's disgusting image. A lifetime of disgusting image. June Moxie said with difficulty, and suddenly roared, Fatty Tang, I've taken you in today. If you can't build a business empire for me, I'll pull out all the fat in your body and use it as a sky lantern. Remember what I said today. This is what I was born to do. Tang Yuan raised his fat neck with great effort and said in a very proud manner, First, tell me your plan. I'll see if there's anything I can do to improve it. Then, I'll give you some pointers. Then, you can watch as this young master shows off his fists and feet. I'll see how all the gold and silver in the world fall into your hands. It's you in my arms. June Moxie corrected, You're not only responsible for making money for me, but you're also responsible for spending money for me. Otherwise, what's the use of making money? If you can't use it properly, even piling up a mountain of gold is useless. As he said that, he took out a few pieces of paper from his bosom. I don't have time to talk to you, this is my plan. Take a look, I don't really understand these things. You claim to be an expert, so give me some advice, and we'll be doing this from now on. As he said that, he patted a certain vital part of Tang Yuan's body, and walked out amidst Fatty Tang's pig-like screams and curses. Tang Yuan muttered disdainfully, I've been doing business all my life, and you're the one who wrote a business plan for me to look at? This is fucking hilarious. Let me take a nap first, then I'll revise and teach you. He closed his eyes, stuffed the pieces of paper from June Moxie under his pillow, and fell into a deep sleep. It wasn't that June Moxie didn't like Fatty, but that young Master June was really busy, very, very busy. For the past 2 days, whether he was walking or sleeping, he'd been researching that strange yin-yang escape technique, the ability to become invisible at any time, anywhere, was simply a life-saving talisman. As long as I master this skill, who can do anything to me? Even if all the supreme martial artists in the world, Shen Xian, were to surround and attack me, I would become invisible with a single hand seal. You bunch of stupid birds, how are you going to kill me if you can't see me? Therefore, Jun Moxie worked tirelessly and brought out his greatest enthusiasm to cultivate the yin-yang escape. In order to experience this technique, Jun Mo Xia had used up all the qi in his body more than 50 times in a single day. More than 50 times, he had emptied his body of qi, and was completely exhausted. Even though the Hongjun Pagoda provided him with a strong supply of spiritual energy, but Jun Moxie's supply still couldn't meet the demand. He had to study the yin-yang escape technique every second, and the amount of spiritual energy needed to activate it was extremely large. Often, in less than 2 practice sessions, Jun Moxie's painstakingly accumulated spiritual energy would be depleted. Therefore, the Hongjun Pagoda would crazily produce spiritual energy to replenish it. Then, Jun Moxie would practice again. Then, he would find time to replenish it again. The cycle repeated itself. However, this repeated process also brought about a virtuous cycle for Jun Dashao. It directly caused Jun Moxie's cultivation to rise to a new level in these 2 days. However, the disadvantage of Jun Dashao was that he didn't have a good teacher to guide him. He could only rely on himself to explore. This was equivalent to the blind touching an elephant. Little by little, he suffered a lot. What really made Jun Moxie depressed was that it seemed that there was no effect at all. He practiced until he was physically and mentally exhausted. Even his soul, which seemed to know nothing about fatigue, was tired. If there was any effect, it would be that the little lowly Kuer was a little crazy. That was the only effect that could be seen from it. Kuer, can you see me? I can see you. Young master, what do you mean? Are you telling me a joke? Kuer opened her big round eyes and tilted her head, looking at him in confusion. Oh! Jun Moxie flashed back to the study. Young master, excuse me. Why are you blocking my way? Kuer raised her head. Young master, don't pull my clothes. Young master, you are messing up my hair. Young master, why are you sticking your face to the wall? Are you feeling uncomfortable? So, Jun Moxie angrily ended the wall test. Young master, you are very strange today. Gidge, young master, your posture is very ugly. Ah. Young master, what are you? Don't hit your head against the tree. If you have a headache, I will call a doctor for you. The little loli was completely scared. Fu*k. Jun Mo Xia was going crazy. How the hell do I train with this broken thing? Aren't you playing with me? After experimenting hundreds of times, Jun Moxie silently sat down under a big tree in the courtyard. In order to practice this escape technique, Jun Dashao had paid a painful price. At the very least, his forehead was red because he wanted to go through the wall, the top of his head was bumpy like the head of the Buddha. He was experimenting with the escape technique. Leaping high into the air, he fell head first onto the ground, and with a loud thud, he saw stars all around him. His clothes were on fire, and his body was covered in blisters. This was the only result of practicing the escape technique. As for the wind escape technique, Jun Dashao didn't know about it for the time being. As for the yin-yang escape technique, damn it, do I have to go to hell to practice it? If I continue to practice, I might cross over again. Jun Mo Xia looked at his scarred body with a sad expression. He suddenly lowered his head, and his disheveled hair stuck into his crotch. Then, he rolled on the ground like an egg. Little Ku was scared to death. Grandpa Jun had often been away from home ever since he had handed over his position as the family head to his son, Jun Wuyi. Moreover, Jun Wuyi had also learned the art of disguising himself. So, it was impossible to see his shadow. Therefore, the little loli was left with no choice but to ask Guan Qinghan. Swearing and shedding tears, he finally managed to invite Guan Qinghan over. When Guan Qinghan arrived, she saw Jun Dashao with his head stuck in his crotch. His whole body was bent into a ball, and rolling on the ground. The worst part was that his clothes weren't covering his body. For example, the big hole on his buttocks was very white and dazzling, although the skin was very smooth. Bah, what am I thinking about? What are you doing? Guan Qinghan was a little surprised, and coldly looked at her brother-in-law. Is it fun to abuse yourself? I really don't know what's wrong with this guy. What's wrong with him? Look at him, he's even more artistic than a beggar. Jun Imo Xia raised his head blankly, and mumbled something to himself. His eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at Guan Qinghan for a while. But, it seemed as if he hadn't seen anything. Then, he suddenly held his head in his hands, and started to ponder. Then, he jumped up with a wah-ha sound, and crashed into a tree with a bang sound. Then, he fell back down, and sprawled on the ground. His eyes were looking at the sky, but they were filled with a look of contemplation. Guan Qinghan was angry and amused at the same time. She scolded, "Why are you still not standing up? What kind of behavior is this? You're the only descendant of the third generation of the Jun family." But now, Jun Moxie's mind was completely immersed in the study of the yin-yang escape. Once he was focused, there was no distractions in his mind. To put it nicely, he didn't care about anything around him. But to put it bluntly, he was stubborn, and wouldn't turn back no matter if he hit the wall or not. Even if his head was bleeding, he would continue to hit the wall. How could he hear what Guan Qinghan was saying? He didn't even know that his beautiful sister-in-law, Guan Qinghan, was already in front of him. This was what he was persistent about, and it might also be the reason for his success. No matter what he did, he would concentrate all his energy and intelligence, and do his best. He furrowed his brows and thought hard for a while. Then, he suddenly leaped up and landed on the ground with his head down and feet up, bang! Jun Moxie twitched a few times, and his eyes rolled back. He smiled foolishly and said, "I need to quickly practice martial arts, so that I can peep at my beautiful sister-in-law bathing." Then, his body stiffened, and he fainted. Only God knows how this sentence slipped out of his mouth. Perhaps even Jun Moxie himself didn't know why he would say such a sentence in such a muddle-headed situation. My God, God, and God, what is this? In front of his beautiful sister-in-law, he said that he wanted to peep at her bathing. Guan Qinghan was so angry that her delicate body trembled, and her pretty face turned pale. Young mistress, young master's mind, is muddled now. He's talking nonsense, please don't take it seriously. Young master, he has improved a lot recently. Kuer's face was red, and she waved her hands in embarrassment, stammering as she explained. Guan Qinghan's eyes were spitting fire, and she snorted coldly, Kuer, now even you are helping this bastard to do evil. Without saying a word, she rushed forward, and with a bang, she kicked him heavily. Thinking that it wasn't enough to vent her anger, she wanted to kick him again. Jun Imo Xia let out an "oh no," and stood up from the ground. His expression was one of pleasant surprise, joy, and bewilderment. His expression changed several times in an instant, and it seemed incomparably strange. Guan Qinghan didn't say a word, and her eyes were filled with tears. What Jun Moxie said just now could be said to be a great humiliation to her. She opened her hand and slapped Jun Moxie's face. Jun Moxie raised his head, took a step back, and dodged the slap. He said in surprise, "Sister-in-law, everything was fine. What are you doing?" Based on his intuition, that slap just now was definitely not at the level of beating him up in a normal sparring session. If he really took that slap, he reckoned that half of his teeth would fall off. You know it in your heart. You bastard! Guan Qinghan shouted angrily, and her pretty face was as cold as frost. She pressed forward step by step. Jun Moxie took each step carefully, and calmly dodged. I don't remember offending you, sister-in-law. Why are you like this today? How else do you want to offend me? Guan Qinghan saw that this bastard brother-in-law was so shamelessly quibbling. She snorted coldly. Seeing that she couldn't do anything to him with her fists and legs, she suddenly pulled out the long sword from her waist. The sword light flashed in the air, and with a swoosh, it stabbed towards Jun Moxie's shoulder. Jun Moxie was shocked. What's going on? She actually used a knife? Confused, he rolled and crawled to avoid the attack. He had already overdrawn his body's Xian power no less than 100 times today. He was already physically and mentally exhausted. At this moment, he suddenly understood something, and the spiritual energy that he had painstakingly replenished was depleted once again. Now that he was facing Guan Qinghan, it was tantamount to being abused. Especially when he couldn't fight back, naturally it was even worse. With a bad thought, he made a prompt decision, and quickly turned to run. Ku'er jumped to stop Guan Qinghan, but with her insignificant cultivation, how could she stop the raging Guan Qinghan? When Fatty Tang heard the noise outside, he lied on the bed and shouted, "Murder!" Immediately, it was a mess. At this moment, the gatekeeper ran over, "Young master, young madam, Jiang Nan's housekeeper, Lord Guan, and 2 young masters have brought people to visit." Guan Qinghan cried out, and her long sword fell to the ground. Chapter 157. Jiang Nan's housekeeper was from Guan Qinghan's family. However, he didn't know why the housekeeper and his entourage had suddenly come to Tianxiang City at such a time of crisis. Could it be that the housekeeper also wants the level 9 Xian Dan? Jun Moxie frowned slightly. He felt that something was wrong. The capital city had been in chaos for the past 2 days. The day was quiet and peaceful as usual. But every night the city guards would find several corpses during their patrols. Sometimes, they would even find dozens of corpses. How could such a strange thing not attract the attention of the military of the 5 cities? So, they joined forces with the Ministry of Justice and the city guards to keep a close watch on the movements in the capital city. Several big gangs in the capital city were also getting restless. They were even willing to risk the tight security to commit crimes. This made the investigation even more difficult. As for the results of the investigation, it gave everyone a shock. None of the people who had died were ordinary people. They were all famous figures in Jianghu. Some of them were even at the Earth Xian level. They were all characters who could dominate a region. But now, he had died silently in the capital city. And among the few people who had been investigated, there was no one below the Silver Xian realm. Not a single one. Even the weakest one was at the peak of the Silver Xian realm. Such murders were becoming more and more frequent with the increase in the number of foreigners. This was especially true for the most recent incident, which contained the corpses of members of the Murong family, one of the great families in the capital. As they continued investigating, the leaders of the 5 cities' military office, the city guards army, and the Ministry of Punishment were instantly dumbfounded. The Murong clan was not the only one who had interfered in this matter. The Li clan, the Song clan, and the Meng clan were also involved in this matter. Even though they did not have any direct evidence, the vague momentum was definitely not wrong. Even the 3 princes seemed to be vaguely involved in this matter. How could they investigate? They couldn't investigate until they found out about their own family. Although they didn't dare to investigate further, the 3 officials were muttering in their hearts. Is there going to be a big change? Especially when the envoys from the 2 countries arrived in Tianxiang City. The night in Tianxiang City became even more turbulent. Once night fell, the demons danced wildly as they flew high up in the sky. All kinds of profound energy lights of different colors flew here and there. In the end, the city guards simply found a high place to squat down and enjoy this gorgeous but bloody fireworks show for free. The solitary falcon was walking down the street in a cold and heavy manner. He hadn't come across anyone of the same level as him in the last 2 nights, and although he was somewhat regretful that he hadn't come across anyone of the same level as him, but he was a martial arts fanatic. Therefore, the solitary falcon could be said to be one of the most active people in the city these last 2 nights, and would attack anyone that he came across, regardless of who the other party was or how strong they were. Of course, Solitary Eagle didn't think that he was bullying people. "I didn't intend to kill anyone. I only wanted to learn from each other. It's your strength that's too trashy. You can't even take a few of my moves. How can you blame me? Anyone who had fought with him had lost more than half of their life. If they were unlucky and met other groups of people, they basically didn't have the strength to fight back and were one-sidedly slaughtered. Therefore, strange things were happening in Tianxiang City these days. Silver-level Xian Qi practitioners killed gold-level Xian Qi practitioners, and gold-level Xian Qi practitioners killed Yu Xian. It was a complete mess. Solitary Eagle was walking slowly towards a big house. After 2 nights, Solitary Eagle didn't feel that he had gained much. After all, at his level, ordinary low-level Xian Qi practitioners wouldn't be able to give him much inspiration. Therefore, Solitary Eagle locked his target on Earth Xian Qi practitioners. However, if he wanted to find the whereabouts of these people, he would need to have a specialized intelligence network. If he only met them on the road, how long would that take? Therefore, Solitary Eagle was walking coldly towards Tianxiang City's #1 gang, the Jinyang Gang's headquarters. This was a shortcut. As long as he subdued the Jinyang Gang, he would be able to find the whereabouts of the experts in the Tianxiang City. With the ability of the Prairie's Eagle God, wouldn't it be a piece of cake for him to clean up a local gang? Even if the Jinyang Gang was the #1 gang in the Tianxiang City, it was still just a Jianghu gang. How could they escape from the hands of the Prairie's Eagle God? Therefore, Solitary Eagle was very confident. In fact, it should be said that he was very confident. Boom! The thick door of the Jinyang Gang suddenly broke into pieces and turned into sawdust. The people who were drinking tea inside were startled and stood up. The Jinyang Gang was the leader of the 6 biggest gangs in the Tianxiang City. Who had the guts to provoke them? Amidst the flying sawdust, a figure slowly walked in. Long hair and black clothes. Tell Jin Feng Lai to come and see me. The solitary falcon's imposing manner was like that of a monarch's, and he sat down in the hall, and didn't even look at the people around him as he began to issue orders. The Jinyang Gang might be the leader of the 6 biggest gangs in the Tianxiang capital, and Jin Feng Lai was its leader, but in the eyes of the solitary falcon, there wasn't much difference between the Jinyang Gang's leader and a common peddler. In fact, the solitary falcon felt that he could kill them at any time, and that the existence of the Jinyang Gang was like that of an ant. The members of the Jinyang Gang looked at each other in dismay for a moment, but then started shouting and cursing, and rushed forward with their swords and benches clattering against each other. The solitary falcon snorted, stood up, and punched out with both his fists. Suddenly, blood began to flow like the sunset, and the blades began to fly in all directions, and then everything became quiet. At night, Jun Moxie was still obsessed with the yin-yang escape technique. He was still diligently practicing the yin-yang escape technique. However, this one-track-minded killer almost choked himself to death. Ever since Guan Qing Han's kick, Jun Imo Xia had suddenly understood something. The ancients had a sudden enlightenment, and now that sister-in-law had kicked him, he suddenly had a flash of insight. Since then, Jun Imo Xia had also recovered from his daze, and had begun to practice with his back to the others. He had forbidden anyone from getting close to him, even Kuer had not been allowed to watch from the side. This was because the yin-yang escape technique was unprecedented. If it caused a sensation, then the news of Jun Moxie practicing this technique would spread faster than any other news. After experimenting several times in the afternoon, Jun Moxie had made great progress. He was able to stay invisible for 3 breaths and move 10 feet. However, these 3 breaths were not to be underestimated. In a fight between experts, life and death could be decided in an instant. Not to mention 3 breaths, even a single breath was enough to kill the enemy 10 times over. Such a result made the hitman Jun extremely happy. His mind heated up, and he started to practice the earth escape technique. The earth escape technique was the stuff of legends. Imagine fighting with an enemy, and then suddenly disappearing without a trace. Then, a long sword would emerge from the ground, and kill the enemy in one fell swoop. How satisfying would that be? So, Jun Imo Xia gathered his spiritual power, and started chanting the incantation in the courtyard. There was a whooshing sound, and Jun Emosie's shadow really disappeared. But the problem had also become apparent. He had burrowed himself into the ground, but he couldn't come out. Afraid of failure, Jun Moxie had accumulated his spiritual energy to the brim. In one breath, he had gone several feet into the ground. He knew that he had succeeded, and couldn't help but feel complacent. But when he wanted to come out, he found that there was a problem. He had already exhausted his spiritual energy. It was true that he needed spiritual energy to come in, but he also needed spiritual energy to go out. But now he didn't have any left. What should I do now? What should I do? Stay in the ground. Jun Moxie felt a huge pressure coming from all directions. For the first time, he felt that the earth also had power. But the biggest problem was suffocation. There was no air in the ground. Even if it wasn't a vacuum, it was almost impossible to breathe. That was the real problem. Trying to climb up with brute force? But who knew how deep he had gone? Besides, the Jun family's courtyard soil wasn't ordinary soil. That day, the Hong Jun pagoda had pressed down the courtyard by 3 feet. It was equivalent to using a 10,000-pound hammer to tamp down the soil. It was estimated that the soil was now stronger than ordinary granite. Trying to use your head to get out? No way. Jun Moxie crazily called for the Hong Jun pagoda. But today, this great god seemed to be in a bad mood. He actually refused to appear. For one day and one night, the Hong Jun pagoda supplied spiritual energy to Jun Moxie to practice the yin-yang escape. This had happened more than 100 times. It was like 2 football fans going to the field. One of them was itching to play, but he still had to pick up the ball and throw it to the other for practice. The other fan, on the other hand, was itching to play, but there was no room for him to play. Could it be that this pagoda also knew how to be angry? Damn it, but don't choose this time to be angry. I'm about to suffocate to death. Jun Moxie wanted to cry but no tears came out. He felt the suffocating feeling in his body getting stronger and stronger. His whole body felt like it was congested. His heart was beating faster and faster. It was as if it was about to jump out of his mouth. But he couldn't move his body. The spiritual energy in his body was long gone. He couldn't even move a finger. Could it be that he had to go through another time? But this time, it was too humiliating. It didn't sound good. At this time, Jun Moxie strangely remembered the day he had gone through another time. He couldn't help but curse in his heart, damn it. Ever since I met you, this damn broken pagoda, I haven't met anything good. In my previous life, I had an earth-shattering divine skill. But, I couldn't move because of you. I could only watch as dozens of guns fired at me and turned me into a sieve. Dozens of grenades were dropped on me and blew me into pieces. Now, I'm paralyzed because of you. I can't move at all. I'm waiting to die from suffocation. It didn't take long for Jun Moxie to reach the limit of his endurance. He only felt that his head was ringing. He was afraid that he would faint at any time. But, he couldn't faint. He tried to move his dantian countless times, but there was still no movement. There was no reaction. Even his thoughts were muddled. He couldn't think with normal thinking. At this moment, a golden light suddenly flashed in his mind. The Hongjun pagoda had finally appeared. It was spinning slowly and gracefully. Young Master Jun didn't even have the strength to curse at this moment. He just waited quietly. Chapter 158. Suddenly, he felt a cooling sensation on his head. It turned out that the Hongjun pagoda's spiritual energy had surged down in a direct manner, all the way to his dantian, and then swept upwards. Jun Moxie immediately felt the suffocating feeling disappear. He couldn't help but feel refreshed, and quickly used this new wave of spiritual energy to recover his strength. When he had recovered a third of his strength, he couldn't wait any longer, and quickly used the yin-yang escape technique. Puff! Jun Moxie finally poked his head out of the ground, and breathed in fresh air. He suddenly felt as if he had come back from the dead, and greedily breathed in. My God, I've never realized that this air is actually so cute and delicious. Panting heavily, June Moxie actually didn't realize that only half of his body had poked out of the ground, and that the lower half of his body was still buried in the soil. Young master. A high-pitched voice suddenly rang out, and the little lowly Kuer ran over, crying as she ran. Young master, what happened to you? Who did this? How could they be so heartless, so immoral, burying a living person? Boo-hoo. June Moxie, I can't possibly tell this little girl that I buried myself, right? That's too shameful. No, even if you beat me to death, I can't say it. Grand Aunt, don't shout anymore, you're deliberately letting more people know about this young master's embarrassing matter. After a Herculean effort, he finally convinced the little lowly to stop her surging tears. With great difficulty, June Moxie pulled himself out like a green onion on dry land. His waist hurt, his legs were sore, and there wasn't a single part of his body that didn't feel uncomfortable. This was all solid ground, but there wasn't a single crack. It would be strange if he didn't feel uncomfortable. Although Kuer was one of his people, the less people who knew about this strange matter, the safer it would be. June Moxie originally wanted to recover his spirit, and once again use the technique. He would be able to pull himself out without any injuries. However, he was accidentally discovered by Kuer, and June Moxie was in for a tragedy. He couldn't just pull himself out in front of the little lowly with a whoosh, and then leave a hole in the ground, right? Wasn't that too ridiculous? Wouldn't he scare this little girl out of her mind on the spot? If he couldn't keep his mouth shut and blurted it out, then June Sunshao would be in big trouble. After digging a big hole in the ground, June Moxie crawled out in exhaustion. He lay on the ground and groaned. After reminding the little lowly not to say anything, June Moxie was about to return to his room when suddenly, oh my God! Hitman June had never lost so much face in both of his lives. But today was the day he had lost so much face. Third young master, my dearest third young master. Brother Emos, yeah, uncle, my dearest uncle. Where are you, where are you? Come quickly, come quickly. Fatty Tang's cries resounded through the sky like a pig being slaughtered. That kind of intense surprise had already surged to the extreme, like a pervert who hadn't been able to find a wife for 8 lifetimes, suddenly seeing the 7 fairies in the sky bathing in front of him. June Moxie nervously pushed open the door to Fatty's room, only to find that Tang Yuan's personal maid was already scared like an old sow sifting chaff, hiding behind the door and trembling incessantly. It was the middle of the night, and Fatty Tang's earth-shattering howl had attracted the attention of the June family's patrolling dogs in unison. It was a magnificent sight to behold. Oh God! Fatty Tang continued to chant, his eyes brimming with tears as he looked at June Moxie, his body trembling violently to get out of bed. His expression was incomparably excited, his small eyes that were half covered by his fat were miraculously wide open, and his face was radiant with the radiance of pilgrimage. This appearance was like that of a devout Buddhist who had suddenly seen the Buddha appear in front of him. My God! Uncle, lie down quickly. June Moxie took 3 steps at a time. If he really let this fatty fall out of bed, he reckoned that this guy would be crippled for the rest of his life. If he let this guy become crippled in his own home, then it would be the same for him. How could June Moxie not be anxious? You. Tang Yuan's eyes were brimming with tears, his lips trembling. You what you? Stop, you and me. June Moxie squinted his eyes, his anger rising. Fatty, I'll call you big brother, alright? Please don't be so excited, it's already the middle of the night. Even if you don't rest, you have to let others rest. You have some pity on my night patrol dogs, they've been working hard for the whole day, why don't you let them rest? Why are they accompanying you in the middle of the night and excitedly barking? I'm going to fucking die. Tang Yuan stared straight at June Moxie, suddenly sobbing. Third young master, I really didn't know that you actually have such a talent, the wisdom to bring peace and stability to the country, the unfathomable schemes, the world-shaking mind, the truly unparalleled genius, the peerless talent, the brilliance of the world. My worship for you is like a surging river, surging wave after wave, like the eternal Tian Fa forest, like the eternal snowy peak that connects the sky, like the eternal surging of the boundless ocean. Fuck me, you really. Stop. The series of flattery made June Moxie confused, but at the same time, he felt that he was not being praised. Finally, he used a bit of clarity to stop Fatty Tang's endless chatter. What exactly are you trying to do? This fatty must be plotting something. How am I talented? Although this is the truth, everyone can see that I'm so talented, even a fatty like you can see that I'm just an introvert. This business plan. Fatty Tang's hands trembled as he pinched a few pieces of paper in his hands. Was it really written by you? You didn't hire a gunman? June Moxie nodded his head in confusion. Yes, why? Why would I hire a gunman for this? There was really no need to hire a gunman. In his previous life, June Dashao was the king of assassins. As he often needed to disguise his identity, he still needed to master some basic knowledge, such as the business plan given to Fatty. That business plan was not considered top-notch. Perhaps any graduate from a famous business university would be more outstanding than June Dashao. It was just some simple ideas. If it was too in-depth, he would not be able to write it out. Is there a need for this? What's wrong? You're asking me what's wrong. Tang Yuan was inexplicably excited. He got carried away and grabbed June Moxie's hand, holding it with all his might. Master, please accept a bow from your disciple. No, master, please accept me as your disciple. It's not a problem to be your disciple. Ugh. I'm too excited. June Emosia suddenly felt as if his hands had been wrapped in a thick sponge. He hastily tried to pull his hands out, but Fatty used all his strength to resist. June Emosia's physical strength was at its lowest point. So, he couldn't pull his hands out no matter what. Then, he heard Fatty plead with tears in his eyes, Master, please be merciful, and accept me as your disciple. Fatty, if you keep acting like this, do you believe I'll throw you into the pigsty alive? Just let go of me. June Moxie threatened fiercely, then scratched his head in confusion. This plan, could it be that there's something good about it? Could it be that there's really a saying that when a protagonist casually comes up with something, there will be lackeys crying and begging to hug his thighs? Fatty Tang reluctantly let go of his hands, but when he heard this, he immediately glared and shouted with dissatisfaction. What do you mean by, there's something good about it? There should be a limit to boasting, even though this is obviously the ultimate treasure of business. It's a huge invention that has never been seen or heard of before. It's a treasure that is worthy of any businessman in the world to worship, study and study diligently for the rest of their lives. But you have to be humble, only then can you have the demeanor of a grandmaster in the business world. As he spoke, Fatty Tang became excited again. Ha! Is it really that good? June Moxie was really doubtful. How did I become a business guru of my generation? After all, he had never really done business before. At most, he was just pretending to be a businessman. This information was only what he had heard and seen in his previous life. He had scribbled down everything that he could think of. He was prepared to let Fatty Tang use his discretion, but he didn't have much assurance in his heart. He didn't expect that Fatty Tang would actually hold it in such high esteem, which was unexpected. Hitman June had obviously ignored the limitations of the two eras he had experienced, and the comparability of the business world. It's scary to have no knowledge. But it's even scarier to have advanced knowledge. Tang Yuan took 2 deep breaths, and then grimaced in pain. His previous torment had already affected his wounds, but he was too excited before, so he didn't feel it. Now that he had calmed down, he naturally felt it. Fatty said with a bitter face, Third young master, quickly look at my butt, is it bleeding? It hurts a lot. Blarg. June Moxie retched, damn it, I'm not looking. In case you spray it again, this young master still needs to keep this face of mine to pick up girls. Tang Yuan was both angry and amused at the same time. He felt pained and embarrassed at the same time. Motherfucker. Do you think you can just spit it out whenever you want? I didn't take any medicine today, and I didn't even eat anything. June Moxie straightened out his wounds, and said in a serious tone, "Fatty, seriously speaking, can this idea really be used? Believe me. This is absolutely the golden rule of all businessmen in the world. It's full of wonderful ideas that have never been seen before. As long as we follow the instructions, and at most make some slight changes, you and I will definitely become the richest people in the continent." Tang Yuan pointed to the sky and swore, "Third young master, as long as you have the goods, I, Tang Yuan, will open shops all over the continent. Damn it, even if it's the Xian beasts in the Tian Fa forest, as long as they have the money, I can open a shop there." "That's good." June Moxie exhaled, "In the future, I won't care about this. When you recover, you'll be responsible for everything, remember, as long as it's business matters, whether it's looking for people, buying land, building, hiring, opening shops, keeping secrets, etc. Don't look for me for anything. I'm really not interested in this stuff. Don't worry, I understand. When a master reaches the peak, he will not want to experience a journey without an opponent again. I really understand. This time, I, Tang Yuan, will do it for you. Gold and silver will roll in, just wait and see." Tang Yuan was full of confidence. As he spoke, his eyes focused on the papers again, and he was full of praise as he looked at them. "Then I'm going to sleep, I still have things to do tomorrow." June Moxie said tentatively. Go away, go away. Don't disturb my mood. This is good stuff." Tang Yuan waved his hand, as if he was shooing away a fly, his eyes still fixed on the papers. "Damn it. Just now you said you wanted to worship me as your master, and now this attitude. You disobedient disciple who deceives your master." June Moxie scolded angrily, but there was no response. Tang Yuan's attention was completely not on him now. Chapter 159. Although he had gone through a lot of trouble, June Moxie was pleasantly surprised to find that the qi in his body had increased by a lot. Even the yin-yang escape technique could support him for a few more breaths of time. However, the thing that made June Moxie the most pleasantly surprised was that he had realized something through this incident. No matter how powerful the Hongjun Pagoda was, it was only the Hongjun Pagoda, and not June Moxie. The most reliable thing was still his own strength. Therefore, it was most important not to rely on external things, but to focus on improving his own strength. Tomorrow afternoon was the appointed time of 3 days, and June Moxie still needed to make some preparations. Therefore, after activating the Hongjun Pagoda to repair his body, June Moxie went straight to the wine warehouse, and fiddled with it for a long time. Under the boundless night sky, Jun Wui was wearing a mask, and his entire body was bathed in blood as he jumped over the wall of a big house in the capital. He looked at the group of boys and girls who were supporting each other as they walked away, and his eyes were full of gratification. One mustn't misunderstand. The third Master Jun's current strength had allowed him to bathe in blood. However, he had bathed in the blood of other people. So, how could there be any experts guarding these filthy places? So, it was easy for him to move around. The big house behind him was full of corpses. This was the third stronghold that he had destroyed since he regained his ability to move around. Now, Jun Wui completely agreed with June Moxie's words. Some people disregard the law, and are inhuman. For this, we can only kill them. Cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, and use violence to control violence, that is the right way. If they had not carefully investigated and secretly followed him, who would have thought that the home of this wealthy man, who had a good reputation, was actually such a filthy place? During the first operation, Jun Wui had held back, and only injured the people inside, and did not kill them. Then, he had anonymously sent a message to the city guards, asking them to detain these people, and enforce the law. Who would have thought that in just one day, those people would disappear from the dungeon without a trace? Jun Wui asked around and found out that these people had been taken to a secret place to recuperate. They were served with delicacies and precious herbs every day. In a fit of rage, Jun Wui rushed in and killed everyone. From then on, Jun Tri-Leaf learned his lesson. Since the law couldn't punish him, he would enforce justice on behalf of the heavens with his sword. Let me represent the moon, represent the heavens to punish him. With a cold smile, Junwei rose up and disappeared in a flash, leaving behind a pale blue light. In another corner of the capital, a man in blue sat cross-legged on a bed with his eyes lowered, not saying a word. In front of him was a heavily injured black-clothed man wrapped in countless bandages. Brother, if it wasn't for the fact that I have no other choice, I wouldn't have come to beg you. You came to Tianxiang City from thousands of miles away, and not only did I not treat you well, but I also made you wade into these muddy waters. I feel very guilty. But brother, if you didn't help me, I'm afraid that my life's work would have been gone without a trace. The black-clothed man who was speaking was the leader of Tianxiang City's #1 underground gang, the Jinyang Gang's leader, Jin Fenglai. After Solitary Eagle had wreaked havoc in the Jinyang Gang, the leader of the Jinyang Gang had been defeated by him in less than 3 moves. And this was because Solitary Eagle had been lenient, otherwise, his head would have been twisted off in the first move. For a person who stood at the peak of the world to deal with a gang leader, it was not even worth mentioning. Even if it was the #1 gang in the Tianxiang Empire, it would still be the same. Jin Fenglai was at the middle stage of the Earth Xian realm. Perhaps he was already an unreachable existence in the eyes of ordinary people, but in the eyes of a spirit Xian expert, he was only a slightly larger ant. After that, Solitary Eagle proposed the surrender of the Jinyang Gang, and deliberately gave Jin Fenglai 2 days to consider. As far as the Solitary Falcon was concerned, it was only a matter of time before the Jinyang Gang would surrender to him, but if Jin Fenglai could find a strong enough expert to help him, then that would be a good thing. Therefore, he didn't reveal his identity to the Solitary Falcon. Otherwise, with Solitary Eagle's status, he would be giving face to the Jinyang Gang and Jin Fenglai. Unfortunately, Jin Fenglai didn't know. Brother Jin, you said you only took 3 moves from him. The blue-robed man's face was handsome, and he looked to be about 40 years old. His face was calm. 3 moves. Do you know that even if it isn't difficult for me to defeat you with my current cultivation, it won't be easy for me to defeat you within 3 moves? This man's Xian skills are above mine, maybe even far beyond mine. Brother Hai, don't tell me, you. Jin Fenglai was tongue-tied, but the words "don't tell me you don't care" were stuck in his throat. The blue-robed man stood up, and paced back and forth in the room. His blue robe was flowing like the sea, and as he walked, he felt as if the waves of the sea were rolling away. But now, the blue-robed man's heart was bursting with annoyance. He had been stuck at the peak of the sky-profound realm for more than 10 years, and had never been able to break through. This time, he had also heard the news about the peak of level 9 Xian Core. Although he knew that there was not much hope, but he still held on to that tiny bit of hope. He had traveled day and night, hoping that he could get lucky. Who knew that he would encounter such a troublesome matter as soon as he arrived? The blue-robed man's name was Hai Feng, and he was a freak of the seas. He was temperamental, and only acted according to his heart. He was always free and unrestrained. It was difficult to distinguish between good and evil. More than 10 years ago, Hai Feng had come to Tianxiang City, and had a conflict with someone. That person was an expert from the Yu family. Although Hai Feng was defeated, he was besieged by several people from the Yu family, and was eventually seriously injured. If not for Jin Fenglai's help, this freak would have already stepped on the road to the Yellow Springs. Hai Feng was a man who knew how to repay kindness. In just 1 year, he had helped Jin Fenglai expand the influence of the Jinyang Gang from a small gang to become the #1 gang in Tianxiang City, and then floated away. The reason why they had come to the Tianxiang City to participate in the competition for the level 9 Xian Core, even though they knew that there were a lot of experts in the city, was because they wanted to rely on the Jinyang Gang. After all, the Jinyang Gang had deep roots in Tianxiang City, and they were well informed. If the Jinyang Gang were to help him, then his chances of seizing the Xian Dan would naturally increase. However, he didn't expect that the Jinyang Gang would come to him first before he could even ask for help from the Jinyang Gang. Hai Chen-feng felt extremely depressed for a moment. He couldn't help but ask himself, is Tianxiang City a forbidden place for me, Hai Chen-feng? I can't even set foot in here. If not, then why is there such a big trouble waiting for me every time I come here? According to Jin Feng Lai, the strength of the mysterious black-robed man was at least above his own, and perhaps even stronger. What should I do? He paced back and forth, feeling more and more depressed. He raised his head, and sighed inwardly. He had already made a decision. Forget it. I, Hai Chen-feng, am not the kind of person who doesn't repay kindness. A real man should die. He raised his head, looked at Jin Feng Lai, and spoke in a gentle voice, Brother Jin, please tell that man that I, Hai Chen-feng, will be waiting for him in the southern forest in 3 days. Thank you, Brother Hai. Jin Feng Lai was overjoyed. I knew that you wouldn't just stand by and watch. Over the years, Jin Feng Lai had been very confident in Hai Chen-feng, and had never failed in anything that Hai Chen-feng had handled. The reason why he had dragged the solitary eagle along this time was because Hai Chen-feng was in Tianxiang City at the moment. Jin Feng Lai firmly believed that no matter how powerful the black-robed man was, he could not be stronger than the invincible Hai Chen-feng. Jin Feng Lai was even thinking about where he should celebrate Hai Chen-feng's victory. Ignorance was truly terrifying. One could easily lose one's life, and that of one's family and friends. He didn't even consider that Hai Chen-feng was not invincible. He didn't know that Hai Chen-feng's heart was filled with bitterness at the moment. The battle with the mysterious black-robed man bodes ill rather than well. I believe that even if I win by luck, I'm afraid that it will be a Pyrrhic victory, and I'm afraid that I won't have the strength to fight for the Xiandan. But I can't not repay the kindness of saving my life. Let me do one last thing for the Jinyang gang. Regardless of the outcome of this matter, I, Hai Chen-feng, will immediately leave Tianxiang City, and will never return. Brother Hai, by the way, did you come to Tianxiang City for the matter of the level 9 Xiandan? Jin Feng Lai said excitedly, once this matter is settled, I will immediately arrange for the whole gang to investigate. Haha, to tell you the truth, I had already guessed your intentions when I received the news of your arrival. Therefore, I had already made the necessary arrangements. Jin Feng Lai smiled and said, with the help of Brother Hai and the entire Jinyang gang, I believe that obtaining the level 9 Xiandan will not be difficult. No. You're wrong, I didn't come here for the level 9 Xiandan. Hai Chen-feng slowly shook his head, and a trace of bitterness flashed in his eyes. It's been 10 years since we last met, and I've missed you very much. Therefore, I came to visit Brother Jin, and I will go into closed-door training once I return. Since I've already anticipated the dangers of this trip, how can I let you get involved in this? I'll bear all the pain and consequences alone. So that's how it is. Jin Feng Lai couldn't help but feel sad, then. I don't know when I will see you again, brother. This time, you should stay for 2 more days, and we will have a good reunion. Perhaps the next time we meet will be when you will have a breakthrough in your Xian Qi cultivation. Chapter 160. Ah! Jin Feng Lai stood up in spite of his injuries. How can this be? Why not? Brother Jin, you don't need to be present in the fight 3 days from now. Hai Chen-feng turned around and said in a low voice, I will deal with the black-robed man alone. This matter is settled. Haha, if you see me die on the spot, won't you rush out and risk your lives? That would only increase the number of casualties needlessly. If you hear about my death or defeat from someone else's mouth, perhaps you won't feel so bad if you don't witness it with your own eyes? I, Hai Chen-feng, can only do this much for you after many years of friendship. Hai Chen-feng spoke in a resolute and decisive manner, turned to face the wall, and sat down cross-legged without making another sound. Brother Hai. Jin Feng Lai called out, suddenly feeling an infinitely heavy feeling in his heart. For the first time, he had some misgivings in his heart. Was it right or wrong to ask for Brother Hai's help? Will Brother Hai be in danger? He had always been confident in Hai Chen-feng's victory, so he hadn't been worried before. He had always felt that as long as Hai Chen-feng was willing to help, everything would be fine. It had never occurred to him that Brother Hai, whom he regarded as a god, would fail. Hai Chen-feng didn't speak again. Jin Feng-Lai sighed in a low voice, and withdrew with a heavy heart. Jun Moxie woke up, and felt that there was something strange in the courtyard. He put on his clothes and went out. The sky was just beginning to brighten. More than 200 men were neatly lined up in the small courtyard. Each and every one of them had their bodies perfectly straight. When they saw that Jun Imo-sia had come out of the door, they uniformly shouted in unison, "Young master, we've returned." Jun Moxie smiled as he looked at these 200 strong men patrolling one by one, and secretly nodded in his heart. These men's long-lost battle spirit had been completely restored. Their bodies, in addition to the valiant and iron-blooded temperament of soldiers, now had a bloodthirsty aura similar to that of wild beasts. And Jun Moxie wanted them to have this aura as their first step. "How's the result?" Jun Moxie asked with a smile. Reporting to young master, during this training trip, a total of 300 people left the courtyard. 27 people left the team midway. In the Tian Fa forest, 19 people lost their lives, and a total of 46 people died. The rest of the 254 people were all here. Among them, 130 of them had broken through the 9th grade and reached the Silver Xian initial stage. 84 of them had advanced to the Silver Xian intermediate stage. 36 of them had reached the Silver Xian peak stage. 4 of them had broken through to the Gold Xian Qi. The mission of hunting Xian beasts that young master gave us before we left has been completed. A large man stepped out from the crowd and reported in a loud voice. His voice was filled with unconcealable excitement. They knew that this was a huge improvement for them. "Very good." Jun Moxie praised, "You did better than I expected." Over the past few days, did anyone feel the changes in their bodies? Are you different from before? The moment Jun Moxie's words came out, the 200-plus people immediately laughed in embarrassment. Thinking back to the time when they were idling around in the Jun family, how could they have imagined that they would actually improve so much? And this kind of progress was all forced out by this young master in front of him time and time again through deathly training. Compared to the time when they were in the Jun family's courtyard, their strength had more than doubled. Remember, everyone's achievements are forced out of them. As long as you continue to force yourself, your body will have endless potential to be unearthed. Even a coward can become a warrior. But if you don't force yourself to be ruthless, you can only be like rotten wood, slowly rotting. Even a warrior will become more timid than a coward. Jun Moxie said in a low voice, "Are your current achievements really that high? Let me tell you, this is only the beginning for you. Because your current highest achievement is only gold level Xian Qi, but there are so many jade level, earth Xian Qi, Tian Xian, and supreme Shen Xian in the world. They can force themselves to such a high level, and I find it strange that you can't do the same. Humans have 2 eyes and 1 mouth. Supreme Shen Xian is not a monster with 3 heads and 6 arms. So, the road in front of you is still very long, and very long. Haste makes waste. You don't need to look too far ahead now. You just need to push yourselves harder every day. One day, you'll realize that you've unknowingly reached a new height that you've never dreamed of before. Yes. We will follow the young master's instructions." Everyone's face turned solemn. Before they received the young master's training, they did not pay much attention to him. Everyone had been bewildered after the training. But they had followed his instructions to the letter. Moreover, they had strictly followed his instructions in the forest. Therefore, they had managed to avoid disaster several times. Therefore, these 254 people had been thoroughly convinced by Jun Imo-sia. "Go and look for the 3rd uncle, and see how he will arrange your duties." Jun Moxie waved his hand. "Young master," several burly men stepped forward, looking a little excited. "We also know that we may not be qualified, but... Young master, can you let us follow you? The 3rd uncle will arrange it." Jun Moxie smiled. He was very sure that Jun Wui would definitely assign all these people to him. Because this was already a tacit understanding between uncle and nephew. And now, he really needed such a force. This was the reason. Tang Yuan's snores were still earth-shattering, and he occasionally let out one or two sounds. Ah! My butt hurts. This kind of sound was followed by such snores. Jun Moxie could not help but admire this fatty's thoughtlessness. It had really reached an extraordinary level. The sun had just risen when Jun Wui slowly entered Jun Moxie's small courtyard in his wheelchair. Third Master Jun felt that Jun Moxie's courtyard was very different from his own. Just the flatness of the ground was much better. After experiencing great joy and sorrow, Jun Wui didn't feel much about sitting in a wheelchair. After all, he could stroll around at night, and even during the day, if he wanted to go out, he could just change his appearance and go out. It seemed that nothing would hinder him. Sitting in a wheelchair for the last few days had given Jun Wui a sense of pleasure. Jun Wui couldn't help but feel a little satisfied. You can make your own arrangements for those people, Third Master Jun said. I am very busy. Busy with killing people? Jun Moxie keenly sensed a familiar scent from Jun Wui. He squinted his eyes and smiled. Third uncle, you are too mean. Last night, you went out to eat alone and did not call me. Jun Wui was startled. He raised his head and could not help but laugh. After I came back, I had already cleaned up. You little brat, how did you know? Killing people is not only a physical work, but also a work of the heart and mind. Jun Moxie smiled amusedly. When killing people, it must be because of anger, sorrow, hatred, and righteous indignation. Therefore, to kill someone, one must damage the mind. This is actually similar to using too much anger to damage the liver. After killing people, the hostility will not dissipate, and the body's temperament will naturally be different from usual. Even a valiant general cannot avoid it. This is an extremely important reason why very few people can reach the peak of Xian Qi. Jun Mo Xia smiled coldly, so, after killing someone, you must quickly tidy up your mind and do something that you find enjoyable to do. You must let your mind completely relax. Only then will you be able to get rid of the evil aura and influence of killing someone. Drinking is a good way to do this. That's why most martial artists are addicted to alcohol. In fact, soldiers are the same. So, just taking a bath and changing clothes is far from enough. Jun Moxie squinted his eyes. However, besides me, I believe there may not be many people in this world who can see it. Third uncle, you can rest assured. Ha ha ha, Jun Wui's face turned red. He was worried about this problem, but Jun Moxie was silent. Ignorant child, how dare you make fun of this old man? Jun Moxie looked up at the sky and laughed. Third uncle, you should save this old man for my third aunt. This nephew's teeth ache just from hearing it. This was from the bottom of his heart and was not an exaggeration. Not to mention Jun Dashao, anyone who knew Jun Dashao would also feel their teeth ache. Although Jun Dashao had been crippled for 10 years, his foundation was excellent. His Xian Qi had never slacked off. Over the past 10 years, there was almost no vicissitudes left on his face. Although Jun Dashao was in his 30s, he looked like a 27 or 28-year-old man. Coupled with his excellent foundation, he was definitely an elegant young man with a bit of steadiness and elegance that only a middle-aged man would have. For such a person to suddenly call himself an old man, would you not feel your teeth ache? Jun Wui did not know whether to laugh or cry. As long as there is a junior in the family, you can call yourself an old man. Don't you understand such a simple principle? So, if I have a niece or nephew, I can also call myself an old man? Jun Moxie deliberately made things difficult. I'm only 16 years old. Of course you can. Jun Wui replied in a serious manner. How could such a crappy argument be justified? This world was truly crazy. Jun Moxie fainted and fell to the ground. A 16-year-old can call himself an old man? God, please let me die, this is even more shocking than the heavenly thunder. Is there anything important in the afternoon? Jun Woo-yi smiled warmly. Remember to come back early, there will be a family banquet tonight to entertain the Guan family, and to welcome them. Third uncle, what are they here for? Jun Moxie took the opportunity to ask. Based on the current situation, there should be only two goals. The first is naturally the 9th level Shen Dan. The second is to bring your sister-in-law back. They have already revealed this second point. Jun Wooyi smiled faintly. Qinghan staying in our Jun family has greatly damaged her reputation. So, if Qinghan decides to return home, our Jun family must compensate her. The divorce document is essential, but we must also add something else. For example, we must announce it to the world. That way, we won't let down that child for the rest of her life.